who was the class of college basketball this year, takes another championship home. And this is the third championship since 2000 for Florida basketball, the 2 Billy Donovan years and then this one. Only UConn has more college basketball national championships in the new millennium. Is Florida a blue blood? Is that what we have to? We gotta ask Gordy Chiez about this, because it's always a moving goalpost with who's a blue blood, who's a new blood. But Florida has established themselves as a national championship team. Again, Walter Clayton Jr., unbelievable game, unbelievable closeout, unbelievable play, unbelievable everything from Walter Clayton Jr. I mean, even the the post-game comment, I can't wait to see my mom. It's like the most endearing response when a sideline reporter is asking you what you're most excited about. Just an incredible, incredible performance by Florida. 39-year-old head coach winning a national championship. The youth movement that we've talked about so much on the coaching front in college football has also touched down in college basketball, even at the very highest level. And you now have a sub-40-year-old SEC head coach with a national championship under his belt. Expect that there will be some type of renegotiation and extension and raise in that contract. Lots to get to from this game. But whatever Duke had in the Final Four, whatever syndrome that overcame the Duke Blue Devils down the stretch in the semifinal match against Houston, that was contagious. That flu bug that saw Duke absolutely collapse and perpetually.
That saw Duke puke.
Okay.
Out a chance to win a national championship.
We
hate to see it, OC.
You know what's crazy, though? Is it's so much fun to watch happen when it's Duke, or it's more fun to watch happen when it happens to Duke.
When it's a blue blood that
when
lots
it's
of people hate.
This upper
whether
crust
you do
blue
or
blood.
not. Yeah.
You're just like, okay, it's okay to watch that. And when you're watching a guy that is a reclassified college freshman and he's the one missing the shot that maybe changes the game a little bit, but you can be like, it doesn't matter. He's going to be the number one pick in the NBA draft.
Duke's going to be great again next year.
He's got generational wealth coming his way in like 15 minutes. It's fine. It's fine. It was heartbreaking to watch this happen for Houston because of how it happened for Houston. It is just so unacceptable in a game that close, in a game at this level, to not get that last shot off, to not get the last two shots off. And everything we were talking about yesterday, literally yesterday, might be the best coach in the country, might be the most complete team in the country, legendary conditioning. These guys can battle it out for 40 minutes. They can take it into overtime if they need to. You cannot break the Houston Cougars. People were talking about how their strength and conditioning coach was getting national love. The strength and conditioning coach of a basketball team? When's the last time we had that conversation? I can tell you when. It's literally never. Don't talk. Sometimes, occasionally, rarely, we'll get far enough down the topic ladder to where a football coach, a strength and conditioning football coach, gets a little bit of attention. Like Iowa a couple years ago, their strength and conditioning coach was paid over $1 million, and that was a headline because it was like, hey, Ferentz knows that it's all about the lines of scrimmage particularly. It's all about how big, strong, and athletic and in shape his lines are, and so the man responsible for that is paid a lot of money. You never hear anything about conditioning, strength and conditioning, the running programs of a college basketball team, and we heard that because Houston was able to wear teams down and was just able to outrun everybody, out-hustle everybody, and it was almost poetic the way that the final play, the game-deciding play that allowed Florida to win this game was a hustle play. It was a defensive closeout on a shooter coming off a screen that if he pump fakes, he gets a wide open shot on the second attempt. He has enough time on the clock. It's just a little bit of a lack of awareness there. And then, I mean, James and I were talking about this but right before the show started. It would be much better, and hindsight's 2020, and I'm not pretending that I'm better than Sharp. I'm not pretending that I have any basketball ability at all or any basketball IQ at all, but it would have been far better in that situation to try to force the shot up and have it be rejected right back into your face. Just bounce off of your nose and lips. Slobber on that ball, and then maybe you have a chance to gather it back and take a shot. Not as good of a shot, not as clean of a shot, but the closeout was elite, and it forced that indecision. It forced that hesitation, and he goes up and he drops the ball, and so he can't touch it again because that would be a travel.
Just one more reminder to all the basketball players out there at any level, especially if you're aspiring to be at the college level or beyond. You cannot jump in the air and dribble. Because if you do that, that's a shot basically. That's basically an air ball, and if you touch it again, it's a travel. So if you're gonna jump, you might as well commit to taking the shot. That was my big takeaway. Yes, we could in hindsight we could say he should have had the awareness to pump fake, but I'm not sure that that's totally realistic. I'm not sure he saw the guy closing out when he caught the ball.
Yeah, you pointed out that he's not facing the basket coming off the screen.
With your peripherals, you ought to be able to see a giant guy like was it Condon who did the closeout anyway? One of Florida's just huge forwards or big men with just raptor like wingspan, right? coming at you. You ought to be able to see that. It's easy for us to say you ought to be able to see that in your peripherals when you catch the ball, but he clearly didn't. And so the most realistic thing he should have done, that we can say he should have done, is just commit to taking the shot. And like you said, it looks like he probably gets it blocked if he does, which is why he hesitated not to shoot it. But with a few seconds on the clock, you never know. You never know if you, like you said, if that ball goes right back to you. And if it doesn't, at least you got a shot off. It's way better than what you gave yourself a chance by committing to the shot. Doing what you did, you gave yourself no chance to win that game. Unfortunately for Houston.
The unfortunate, okay. So I immediately, like a lot of us do in sports media, immediately after the game, I go and I'm scrolling on social media to see the reactions. And everyone's reaction is the same as my reaction. Just gutted. That is brutal. You absolutely cannot have that be your final possession. You can't have that be your final two possessions. You can't have that be the highlight. And it's not a highlight, it's a low light. Right? And then you get a little bit further in, and I saw some of the overarching, the big picture stuff. Hey, I know there were no Cinderellas in this tournament. I know that there were, but the final four games were so great that I will take that. If this is what college basketball is going to be moving forward, a bunch of one seeds battling it out down the stretch, I'm okay with it. I don't know if I agree, because was it fun? Was it competitive? Was it crazy? Yeah, it certainly was. But the idea that we love watching two teams that were elite all year fall apart as like that's the basketball you want to see. I don't know if I'm ready to jump all the way in on that. Like, if we're sacrificing, and I know this is not the actual trade-off, but if we're sacrificing the underdog stories, the Cinderella stories, in favor of get these elite teams here, and then the elite teams are going to collapse. I don't like watching collapses necessarily. And it's unfair to say that the only stories in this game were collapses, because like Duke falling apart in the semifinal was okay for us to watch because it was Duke. And it was okay for us, I think, here in Utah especially to watch because you had some kind of like, well, at least hopefully a Big 12 team wins it. At least nobody has any hate for Houston around here, right? It's like, okay.
Not yet, anyway.
Not yet. Like,
if we have a few heartbreaking losses to Houston in with high-stake games, that might change.
But you're looking at it and you say, okay, well, Houston, cool. Like, maybe they can carry the mantle. Maybe they can be the flag bearer for the Big 12 Conference. And so you got to give credit where it's due because, again, this is a Houston team that plays together, that is incredibly experienced. And they forced Duke into making some mistakes that kind of a one-and-done all-star caliber freshman-laden team.
Freshmen
they're going to make some of those mistakes. Yeah. Like bad inbound passes, those are going to happen when you got younger players. Poor shot selection, that's going to happen when you have younger players. And so you're like, okay, cool, but still give credit to Houston. And so I have to do the same thing for Florida. You still got to give credit to Florida because the closeout, again, and it was Walter Clayton Jr. on the closeout.
So it wasn't one of their big forwards, but he's one of the bigger guards in the country, so that's why it looked like a huge guy.
And more importantly is, like, he's emerged as your guy, like your player. And by the way, the recognition and the speed and the hustle here, I want you all, if you have an opportunity, don't get fired for following my advice. Like, you're probably not supposed to be on ESPN while you're at work. You're probably supposed to be doing what you're supposed to be doing.
Take your 15-minute break right now.
But he's under the basket, okay? I think probably believing that there's gonna be a need for help defense under the basket, anticipating a drive. He's under the basket, and he's marked on Sharp, but Sharp is under the basket with him, and then all of a sudden Sharp sprints out to the spot, knowing where the screen's going to be set up. It's not quite straightaway three. It's sort of like free throw. It's the key. It's the line of the key extended.
Yeah.
All right.
Almost the left wing. Yeah.
Yeah, almost. It's not quite that elbow three, but in any case, Sharp sprints out there. And Walter Clayton Jr. is chilling. He's still got his eyes on the ball handler. Cryer was the one I think who had the ball. Is that right?
Yeah.
He's got his eyes there, knowing that his man is sprinting out to the top where he's probably going to take this pass off a screen. He's still anticipating that drive and still hanging out for help defense. And then he recognizes, nope, ball's going to my guy. Ball's going to Sharp. And he breaks on this thing. Like, if I'm the football coach at Florida, I'm like, dude, this kid, that's
got any eligibility left, Walter?
That's deep. That's a DB right there. The recognition.
He's like, sorry, coach, I'm going to be a first-round pick this year in the NBA.
And he just sprints out here and he gets his hand, and it's going to be a long three-point attempt for Sharp.
Yeah.
He's 6 feet outside of the arc, but he's okay taking that shot. He's been okay making that shot.
He's a gunslinger, Emmanuel Sharp. If I didn't watch a ton of college basketball regular season, but throughout the tournament, you're like, oh, this guy, he's got an inch of breathing room. He's gonna shoot,
like no
matter where he is.
So when I freeze frame this, James, when Sharp has the ball, when his fingertips touch the ball, all right, he comes off that screen and he's facing the passer, which of course, right? And his right foot is on the center court logo. He's going to take one step to his front left, basically, and he's going to turn his shoulders left to face the basket, and he's going to try to make this shot, right? Where I freeze frame this, and it's the moment that Sharp is touching the basketball. It's like he doesn't have control necessarily yet.
He's about to finish the catch.
He's finishing his catch here. Walter Clayton Jr. is running around the screener. He has to move his feet to get around the screener. He is at the free throw line. There is 15 feet between these two players when the ball is touching Sharp's fingers. And that's the speed he gets himself vertical while also sprinting forward. And he gets his left hand up, and forces. I think you're absolutely right with your evaluation, James Peterson. I think that Sharp, because there's so much space around him when the ball is touching his fingers, there's no chance he sees anything coming in his periphery because there's nobody near him.
And if he does, he sees that he's still at the free throw line. I have time to catch this, turn and shoot.
Yes, and it looks like when you freeze frame it here, if I'm freeze framing instead of watching the game broadcast view, I'm doing this exact moment from Sharp's viewpoint. Like, all I have to do is catch, turn, and fire, right? And everyone practices the Steph Curry release. Everyone practices that you don't have to necessarily get your feet and shoulders square to the basket in order to fire and make shots reliably, right? Everyone in basketball now is trying to be that level of gunslinger, and Steph does it better than anyone else, and Caitlin Clark does it really well, and Sabrina Ionescu, and there's plenty of folks now who do it incredibly well, and a lot of college basketball players are still sort of developing this, but you're not looking at that. If you're Kelvin Sampson, you're freeze framing exactly where I'm at right now and saying he's going to make the wrong decision here because he's got space.
It looks like he has room.
The nearest defender who is not engaged with the Houston Cougar is at the free throw line, and he is three-point line extended about 6-8 feet. I mean, like I said, his right foot is on the beginning of that midcourt logo. So the time that elapses between this moment where the ball's touching your fingertips and the shot goes up is less than a second. It should be less than a second. Or, in this case, shoulda, coulda, woulda, because of the benefit of hindsight, the pump fake happens first. Clayton Jr. goes flying past you, and then you have a wide-open three-point shot. But this is an ultimate hustle play. And whether you like the SEC, whether you like Florida, whether you like Walter Clayton Jr. or not, this is a guy who is much better known for his offensive prowess, at least in this tournament, right? Who is making this closeout play on another elite college basketball player, and there's just that teeny little lack of recognition that's this infinitesimal, if I said that right, this like minuscule misjudgment, because I promise you, go to the ESPN highlight, freeze frame it at 56 seconds out of the 1 minute and 6 second video, and Sharp has all the space in the world. If this is Steph Curry, that shot's going in because he's touching, turning, firing. It's in. It's a wide open three. Long three. This is Jimmer range, baby.
Yeah, NBA players have a better sense of what is a good shot, even if it's not very open, than college players do. That's one of the big differences between the higher level of the NBA and still not near as high a level as in college basketball. Guys like Steph Curry know that most of the time you're only going to get a foot or a few inches of space. So that's a shot. If you're a good shooter, that's an open shot for you. In college, so many guys pass up those shots because they think they think if they don't have a few feet of space, they must not be open and there must be a better shot. So that's another thing that plays into this is you're totally right. If Steph Curry's in that situation, he's firing, and it doesn't matter what the closeout is. If it's not going in, it's a really good attempt, right? Guys like Emmanuel Sharp don't know that that's an open shot. And it's one of my gripes about college basketball is in this modern age of basketball where perimeter play is more important than it ever was, you need to know when you're open. And I think that was part of why Sharp maybe takes an extra step that he didn't have to take, or he takes just half a second more time to gather before he's ready to shoot, and by that time Clayton's in his face.
Clayton jumps from just inside the 3-point line, and he lands past where Sharp is standing. He's an incredible athlete.
And with all that being said, because that's how the college game is played, I can't say that's a big mess up by Emmanuel Sharp for doing that. That's how he's taught. That's how that game is being played, to not take the as contested as shots as they do in the NBA, right? So I have to land on that was not a mess up by Sharp. It was an incredible play by the Florida defense and Walter Clayton Jr.
You have to. Although I will say this.
It wasn't perfect. Like Sharp, we're fair to say the things we said about what Sharp could have done differently. Well, but the main takeaway should be that Walter Clayton made an incredible defensive play that made Emmanuel Sharp feel like he couldn't get a shot off.
Here's another thing that you could have seen Sharp do. Instead of jump dribbling, which is just like you got the
don't ever jump dribble, people.
You got the
grievance,
the temporary yips. That is like, I mean that is a play. That is a little league basketball play, unfortunately, from one of the better players in this tournament.
It happens.
And it sucks.
NBA players do the jump dribble too, so it's like everyone's vulnerable and guilty of it. But it's still just like
the fact that it happened here in this setting. There's
terrible.
4 seconds left on the clock. When he drops this ball, there's plenty of time.
It's terrible.
And you know what? The rate at which Clayton is coming, the angle at which Clayton is coming, the absolute reckless abandon that this closeout is conducted at. Again, recognition is everything. And split-second recognition in sports is sometimes what separates the elite of the elite from guys who are really good, don't get me wrong, who are incredible, but maybe they don't get to be elite because their processing speed is just a tiny, tiny bit different than the other guys. If he maintains possession of this ball and he leans in a little bit, especially the way this game was officiated,
he probably gets a foul call.
Because Clayton jumps from the free throw line. He can't control his body in space. He's flying. He's hurtling towards Sharp.
I had a coach call that the Superman closeout. It's never good to Superman close out.
Well, it was perfect in this case. If Sharp leans in, Clayton cannot help but make contact, and you're probably going and shooting 3 free throws, which, again, Florida, there's 4 seconds left, so Florida might have gotten a possession after that. But it's a painful thing to watch when it goes down like this for Houston. And 877-353-0700. We are going to lay out the therapist couch. Every athlete at every level, in every sport, has a moment like this that is going to haunt them forever, right? I don't care if it's from a Little League game. Mine comes from, there's 2. I have one from a fight that I won't even talk about. I have another one that comes from a high school football game. Is that the
most you talk about it, is saying it came from a fight? I won't talk about it?
Correct. There's one. I have a scenario from my senior year of high school football playing against Alta at Alta, okay? We knew them very well. That's like the rival, right? You played Little League baseball against all these guys. You grow up knowing these individuals. James, my high school team, we sucked, okay? My age group, we never beat Alta my whole life, all right? My junior year was an incredibly close game. Alta edged us out. My senior year, another close game developing. I don't think I've ever told this story publicly. This is breaking. Wow. This is first.
Tune in.
But this is a moment that if I allow myself to think about it, it still haunts me. I still have twinges of regret. This is 25 years ago almost.
Did you say this is a baseball game?
No, this is a football game.
Okay, well, I was going to say that was news to me that you played high school baseball. Okay,
no,
so football game.
This is a football game. The sport that back at that time mattered more to me than anything in my life.
Yeah.
Okay? Alta had a really good running back, a kid named Dave Anger, okay? And part of the game plan against Alta was I needed to spy Dave Anger on most plays. I was going where he was going. I was the middle linebacker. They ran a lot of offense through him. I was going to go where he went, all right? And most of high school football back then was just run plays. Like there were only Hillcrest High School in our region was passing the ball hardly ever. Everyone else was 3 yards in a cloud of dust or running some kind of option. We ran the old veer. Like it was – anyway, a rare pass play surfaces, all right? And their quarterback, Brock Hansen, is rolling to his right.
Shout out to Brock Hansen.
I see Dave Anger leaking out of the backfield. Just a quick little exit out route, okay? I have, James, a perfect, and I have a perfect angle on it. I have a perfect read on it. It is about to be the best play of my high school career because I'm far enough behind that when I get my break, like I don't, again, like this play that Houston's got, it doesn't look like I'm a threat. So Brock's going to throw this ball. He was a good passer. He was a big, 6'5" kind of baseball pitcher guy, all right? He's going to throw this ball. Dave Anger's going to receive this ball right in front of the Jordan High sideline, and he's going to try to break up and score, all right?
But you got the angle.
I have a perfect angle and a perfect read on this ball, and it should have been a pick six. It should have been an easy pick six. Brock throws the ball, doesn't put any extra mustard on it because he doesn't think I'm a threat. I get a perfect break on this ball, James, and in the last step, I'm getting ugly chills talking about this publicly. In the last step, before I am either going to pick this ball or I'm going to light up Dave Anger, great player. I'm either going to destroy him on this out route, or I'm going to pick six this ball.
There's no concept that this could turn out badly for you in Jordan High School.
Okay.
Yeah.
But
and the Diggers, of course.
I have this ugly hesitation as I'm breaking on this ball and in the final half a yard closing out on this thing. I can't decide, much like Sharp can't decide if he's going to shoot, if he's going to pump fake, or if he's going to jump dribble. He does the only thing that's unacceptable. I got split in the middle. Instead of putting my face mask in his back and destroying him so he can't catch this ball, or instead of fully committing to picking the ball, getting both hands up for the ball, I put one arm around his back and I put one arm up for the ball.
No.
And I just tipped the ball, just barely tipped the ball. And my momentum, because I only have one arm going towards him, my momentum, my full speed run, takes me past him instead. I hit him with my arm, but he's a good player. An arm tackle is not going to bring him down.
Yeah.
Completion. He doesn't go for a touchdown, thank goodness, because I think my guy Keto, was the corner on that side, made the tackle. But it should have been a pick six. And the way the game was playing out at that point, if I pick six that ball, we win the game. James, I still could have bad dreams about that scenario.
That's rough.
That was a meaningless regular season high school football game. For Sharp, this is a national championship game. By the way, there is no film of that moment in my career, my football career. Nope, that game is gone forever.
This one's all over the place. Yeah.
We are going to be watching this and dissecting this, and I did the only wrong thing in that moment. He did the only wrong thing in this moment. I didn't have to tell that story. Nobody else in the world remembers that. Everybody is going to remember this, and no one is going to remember it more than Sharp.
Dave Anger, Brock Hansen, if you're listening, go ahead and text us in. Tell us your memories of that moment. 877-353-0700.
It was brutal.
I have one that maybe share later in the show that's way even lower level than that. Way lower stakes, but haunts me to this day.
But the point stands.
Yeah. Similar to the Emmanuel Sharp.
That for you, it's like you'll never forget it. You'll never get over it. Yeah. Everyone has these moments in their athletic career, and the benefit for most of us, the blessing for all of us athletes who suck compared to Sharp, is that we don't have to watch it play out and be talked about nationally over and over and over and over and over and over and over again. This guy is going to need to go to therapy for this. Check your mental health. Make sure that if you know Sharp, if you know him, give him a call. Make sure he's okay. Sean O'Connell Show, we're just getting rolling here on a Tuesday. Show today and every day brought to you by friends over at Les Schwab Tires. Had a great time at the Les Schwab Tires location in Lehigh yesterday. They've got tires, wheels, and accessories for whatever you drive. Tell them that OC sent you. The pros there are going to get the job done right the very first time. If you got an hour in your day today and you need new tires, stop by your local Les Schwab. They can get those bad boys changed out for you in about an hour. Running great discounts right now on premium tire brands. $120 off instant savings. Go check them out. Thanks to Les Schwab Tires for being a big friend of the show. All right. We'll talk about this closing scenario, Houston, Florida, with Gordy Chiesa. We'll talk about the Utah Jazz season and its final week, the NBA season in its final week as we gear up for, well, we don't, but a lot of teams gearing up for the playoffs. Our resident guru stops by next. That's Gordy Chiesa in 3 minutes on the Sean O'Connell Show, ESPN 700, 92.1 FM. Sean O'Connell Show here on a Tuesday. ESPN 700, 92.1 FM. We got some breaking news from the NBA. We're going to get Gordy Chiesa on here in just a second. The Denver Nuggets have fired their head coach. Mike Malone out in Denver. This reported by Shams Charania and other sources. The Denver Nuggets have fired coach Michael Malone. I thought I was in like some kind of alternate world, taking some crazy pills here. This is the same Mike Malone who won a championship 2 seasons ago and whose team is a 4 seed right now in the NBA. The timing of this is
still an outside chance at a 2 seed. Or sorry, not the 2 seed, the 3 seed.
The timing of this is bananas. I mean, I have not been paying intimately close attention to the behind-the-scenes rumors or anything going on with the Denver Nuggets right now, but your head coach gearing up for a playoff run where you still have one of the best 3 players on planet Earth, a pretty
Gordy.
excellent supporting cast around him, and he's
separated
separated from his duties.
It dialed a few times and then
that's
no answer. So
that's a strange
but it
scenario.
got you now, so we should be good.
So Mike Malone out in Denver. Breaking news.
Just a sec, we'll get you on
from Shams and other NBA insiders. Wowza.
Gordy's ready.
Gordy Chiesa swings by. I guess we have one more thing to talk about with Gordy, our resident basketball and NBA guru. Gordy, how are you?
I'm doing fine, and unlike Mike Malone right now.
Gordy, Mike Malone out in Denver. This just came across everyone's desk. What are your thoughts on, first of all, the fact that it's happening, but especially the timing of this?
The timing is absolutely awful. and it's disarray. They're I don't understand it where they Nuggets, meaning Jamal Murray and those guys, and they struggle defensively. And Jokic's brilliance is shown to the forefront, but the timing is absolutely wrong. And they're tied for fourth place in the West right now at 47 and 32, and there's no rhyme or reason of they're doing this. Jump start for next season.
So, I mean, my mind immediately goes to, all right, what could be the reason for firing someone right before the playoffs starts in an NBA season? And look, there's always the possibility, and I don't want to put any evil on Mike Malone. I don't know him at all. I don't know what his personality is like. I don't know what the behind-the-scenes stuff is. But sometimes a business, an office, has to make a decision. If you are accused of something that has nothing to do with basketball, we know that timing on those types of situations, it really doesn't matter what time. It doesn't matter if you're about to coach the NBA Finals. If something crazy like that is going on, ownership might have to make a move. The only other thing I could think of would be like a player or star players, influential players, being like, I can't work with this guy anymore. I've never gotten that vibe from the Denver Nuggets. And I'm seeing from some guys that I trust in the space that maybe management, maybe the ownership had a conversation with Malone and he said something that they couldn't forgive. I'm just trying to wrap my head around the possibilities on why you would do this right now. Let's go to the player one, Gordy. Is there anything in NBA circles that his team does, that guys like Jokic and guys like Murray don't like playing for him?
No, not at all. They like playing for him very much so. Also, let's add to that. This second time this happened in the last 2 weeks. Let's not forget with the Memphis Grizzlies, Taylor Jenkins, who's also, so it happened twice now. And that's very troubling, where an NBA team, their team for the playoffs at the price of as far as head. Now, coaches are highly fired. I understand that. But this is to the extreme. Let's not forget, Michael Malone led his team to the World Championship recently, and he's a terrific coach, and he's the players genuinely like him. So back in 2023, less than 2 years ago, the Nuggets were world champions. So he can coach at this level.
Yeah, I'm dumbfounded by this. We will give you any update. He's been there since 2015, and now Mike Malone is out. He's had stops with a lot of NBA franchises, assistant coaching for New York, for the Knicks, for Cleveland, for the Hornets, for the Golden State Warriors. Then he got the head job in Sacramento, then the head job in Denver. So we'll see what the future looks like for not only Denver, but for Coach Malone. I wanted to bring you on, Gordy. I thought the first thing I asked you about was going to be last night's college basketball national championship game, especially those final two possessions for Houston. As a coach, to watch that unfold, to see a team, in control for a lot of this game, lose the lead and then not get shots off on those final couple possessions, how painful is that from a coaching perspective to watch?
Painful. Let's add to that. So they had 5 turnovers in the last 3 minutes and 24 seconds, including 3 in the last minute. And it was a classic example, Sean, of over-dribbling and poor spacing. Whoever got the ball in that dribble handoff action was playing laterally, and they just panicked and either turned it over or stepped out of bounds at that one time with the back foot on the sideline. And just generally speaking, they were disarray. And the illustration of it, Sean, is that Walter Clayton Jr. had 7 assists for the game. He had more assists than the entire Houston Cougar team, who only has 5. And that says it all, is that they rarely moved the ball from side to side. When you watched that game last night, we saw the ball pop from right side to middle to left side. It was all over dribbling. Now they're winning the game based on their defense, but suddenly the Florida Gators, their defense picked up. There was one time in the second half that they stopped the Houston Cougars 9 straight possessions, and that turned the game around.
More breaking news out of Denver, by the way. Calvin Booth, their general manager, also being fired, according to Shams and other sources. So a cleanup.
Okay, so Calvin Booth, cleanup right now. So the Krauke family owns besides owning the football team, the Rams, they also own the Nuggets, and they're going almost like a corporate picture now, where they're looking at the big picture of all their sports franchises and they're evaluating it, and they're saying philosophically now that we know we have a good team. We need new leadership from management and from also the coaching staff, and now we're willing to just rely on Jokic right now and reassess very shortly, meaning what, come July 1st. So it's radical, and I'm personally against it. But again, it's ownership. It is all based on ownership right now, not based on anything else. They wanted both people out.
But is there any advantage, even if you know that's going to be the decision after the playoffs, is there any kind of advantage to doing it now instead of whenever your team exits?
No, not at all. The answer is no. Is that the players are stunned. They're going to play almost like comatose during the last few games of the season, and then in the playoffs, it's very likely they're going to get punched in the face as far as not responding, despite Nikola Jokic's absolutely brilliance. So there's no reason why that they're going to play well. So that helps the other teams in the West. So it helps suddenly the Warriors, T-Wolves, Grizzlies, and the Clippers to get a better seeding in the playoffs. Let's not forget, right now as the playoffs stand, that there's the Nuggets are 47-32 in fourth place as we speak with the home court advantage. Now, all tied with 46-32 are the Clippers, Warriors, T-Wolves, and Grizzlies. So there's four teams for eight. There's 4 teams trying to get 2 spots guaranteed into the playoffs. Other 2 people, meaning franchises, will play in the play-in tournament.
Jeez. Absolute insanity. I don't mean to jump all over the place here, but that's breaking news out of Denver. Head coach and GM Mike Malone and Calvin Booth fired by the Krauke family. All right, so let's get back to the college basketball national championship. James and I were admiring the closeout on that final shot that ended up not being a shot, and I was having flashbacks to the terrible moments of my own sports career where you just can't. The recognition just isn't there. You make the absolute wrong play. Obviously, Sharp didn't want to go up and drop that ball and then not be able to touch it and come down. There was 4 seconds-ish left on the clock. So when you're talking to a player after a moment like that, because, I mean, it's absolute devastation, the highest stakes, the biggest stage, and unfortunately you get closed out. You don't get the shot up. You don't touch it again to avoid the travel, but you hear that final buzzer and you haven't done the thing that you should have done. You're going to look back at that film over and over again, notice that you maybe should have pump faked, that there was a play available to you if you leaned in potentially to try to draw the foul, whatever. As a coach, how do you help a guy get past that moment?
Well, the first thing you do is put your arm around him and hug him. That's the first thing. And the second thing is that it wasn't the one play. It was many plays before that. And so a lot of times we're going to focus in on him not taking the shot, but it was the multitude of the previous possessions where they struggled to score the ball. And that's how I would, if I was counseling Emmanuel Sharp, that's what I would do, that I reflect on the other parts of what happened to our team as a unit, and we have to correct that right now. It's devastating for the Houston Cougars. It's really hard to be so close and not get a championship. And for the Florida Gators, they flipped the script where they showed their toughness, which is the Houston Cougars trademark down the stretch, where they made all the big plays defensively. And let's not forget, as far as the report, they tried to really do a good job of slowing down Walter Clayton Jr., and they did. But Alex Condon, the young Australian guy, came through for them on the boards and battled. He's the guy that we're all watching in the NBA too.
Gordy Chase is our guest here on the Sean O'Connell Show, talking all things basketball, college basketball national championship game, Florida over Houston. what's going on in the NBA. Well, the breaking news in the NBA, at least, with Denver making some big-time changes right before the playoffs start. For the Utah Jazz, Gordy, there's going to be no playoff run, obviously. They've successfully secured the bottom of the West, at least for now. A few more games left, eliminated from the playoffs for some time. And you're looking at franchise historic worst levels of road losses, consecutive losses, all that kind of a stuff. Again, this is the plan, though. This is what you're supposed to be doing. What does a successful finish, success being a strange word here, for the Utah Jazz look like as they close out this season in the final week?
To have their worst record in the NBA, that's successful. In other words, last 3 games, and the Wizards will be 1 game behind if they don't win any games also. So the Jazz would have a 40% chance of getting the first lottery pick, which should be Cooper Flagg. And so that's success right now for them to lose and then reassess in the draft and then next summer as far as free agency. So the Jazz now, as far as arithmetic, is that they've lost 9 in a row, and now also they've been unsuccessful 19 of the last 20 games they've lost. And so the question is habits. Do the players have a losing habits, or they understand what the big picture is, and they can overcome that next season? And no one knows the answer until adversity hits next season, which all teams go through, how they respond.
Some local news. Yegor Demin, BYU guard, has decided he is going to go ahead and enter the NBA draft. There was some speculation that maybe he would stick around and try to be part of something special that could be happening in Provo, and also that he might have needed a little bit more development. But depending on who you listen to, he's either a kind of late lottery pick. There are some people not quite as high, but he's a first-round pick in pretty much everyone's mind. I don't know how much you've had a chance to see Yegor Demin play, but your thoughts on the decision officially for him to enter the NBA draft.
It's good for him because next year will be different dynamics. So he had the ball many times to make plays as a tall, I'll call him a perimeter point guard, almost like a lesser version of Joe Ingles. He's 6'9", Yegor. Joe Ingles was 6'8", and having the ball and passing the ball over the top of the defense. So it's for him personally, he should come out. He'll be picked, generally speaking, between 12 to 18 in the draft. So, and he'll make an NBA team and contribute. Now, the problem he has right now is that he has to shoot the ball better like all young guys, and defensively, he's lagging behind. His foot speed's only average. So he's got to try to improve that just by fast twitch motion, but also as far as mastering technique. He can play in the league. He can play well. And he can contribute. He's not going to be in a top 10 pick. And he's so young, though. He's only 19 years old. So in fairness to him, he has a long time to develop right now. And whoever gets him, they're going to get a guy that's be able to make plays for his teammates. He does have an innate ability to pass the ball, which is encouraging. His shooting's not straight. His foot speed's a concern.
Gordy, what's your list today?
Okay, my list today is the men's Final Four Outstanding Player Award winners the last 11 years. And before I give you the names, many of them aren't household names. They're in the NBA, some of them, which shows you that most of the guys that are knockout talent can't lead their teams to the championship because they're too young. They're only 18, 19 years old, freshman or sophomore year. They're not ready for prime time. And so this list is very humbling. These are the guys that were the most outstanding players in the NCAA Final Four. 2014, Shabazz Napier from UConn. 2015, Tyus Jones of Duke University now plays for the Suns. 2016, Brian Arcidiacono from Villanova, who's out of the league. 2017, Joel Berry out of North Carolina. 2018, he plays for the T-Wolves, Dante DiVincenzo from Villanova. 2019, Kyle Guy out of Virginia. 2020, no NCAA tournament. We forget about that with the pandemic. 2021, former Jazz player Jared Butler from Baylor, who now plays for the 76ers. 2022, former Jazz player Ochai Agbaji, who plays for Kansas University, now is on the Raptors. 2023, Adama Sonoko, who's out of the league, played for UConn. 2024, Tristan Newton from UConn, who plays on the T-Wolves, and last night's winner got a tremendous game. Walter Clayton Jr., University of Florida, was voted last night the most outstanding player in the 2025 season. When I think about Walter Clayton Jr., he reminds me a little bit of Freddie VanVleet. He reminds me also of Kobe White of the Bulls, and he reminds me a little bit of Cameron Payne of the New York Knickerbockers. So this is the list of the most outstanding players. The last time a player really noteworthy that was the outstanding player was Anthony Davis, who led Kentucky back in 2012 to the NCAA championship as a freshman, so that he was an outlier. Most of these guys stay for either 2, 3, 4, or even sometimes 5 years now.
Wow. That's a list. So wait, how many?
It's not an impressive list. It's not really as far as the NBA big picture.
It's really fascinating. I mean, and I guess we see this in college football and college baseball and college every sport, but the line of demarcation between not just being like an okay player, but being a major impactful player in the tournament on the biggest stage in college doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be a great NBA player. You might not even be an NBA player, period. It's wild.
That is correct also. And that's why the NFL is so interesting, because the guys can't come out to the draft until after their junior year because they're not developed physically. But in the NBA, it's different, where guys come out at age 18, 19 years old, and there's a rarity that they're ready physically. But we know mentally they're not, because they're way too young. It's not their fault. They're thrown into usually lesser teams, and they're asked to be the savior, and they absolutely aren't ready for it. All the what it takes to be a winning player to lead a franchise, and that's what gets so interesting as far as the NBA, where the guys are young, but who you play against, meaning especially in the playoffs, they're grown men.
Would you like to see the NBA have? I mean, I know you can't put the genie back in the bottle; it's not going to happen. But would you like to see the NBA operate under the same rule, where you have to be at least a junior? You got to be 3 years removed from high school to be in the NBA, like is the case in the NFL, like is the case in the WNBA for that matter?
Correct. The answer is I'd settle for 2 years instead of 3. But this year, now it's only 1 year. And that's why a lot of these guys are in the G League. And they're playing to try to keep developing their skills and their bodies, though. Again, these guys are real. Most young people in the NBA, just generally speaking, they have, I call them high hips, angular bodies, and they're really skilled. They've got to get stronger with their core muscles, and also understand how to use their body to their advantage, minus vertically jumping. So most of these guys are, tremendous leapers, but their body is disjointed. But they're running down. Most young people don't know how to run properly. So it's actually running down the floor or in a sport where, I call it disjointed running, and that creates so much injury problems. And usually speaking, they play offense too fast and defense too slow.
Gordy, I love picking your brain every time we get a chance to. Thank you again, sir.
Thanks, Sean. Peace out. Stay well.
Gordy Chiesa. Love that guy. Don't forget about the Festival of Tees, powered by Utah Golf Association. Each day, we're giving away free rounds of golf to the best courses in the state and beyond. You can hear Down and Dirty with Scott Mitchell, Sean O'Connell Show, and Spence Checketts giving away free rounds of golf as part of our Festival of Tees, powered by the Utah Golf Association, on all of our shows. It's ESPN 700, 92.1 FM.
Speaking of emotion, as the scores come in, as we said, Utah and UCLA going to be the two teams to advance. This was the region of conference champs. Utah, the Big 12 champs. UCLA, the Big 10 champs. And they're both going to advance. A 49th straight for Utah, getting to the NCAA National Championship. It was Zoe Johnson who capped it off on the vault with her 9.95 for Utah.
Red Rocks advancing to nationals for the 49th consecutive year. That sound courtesy of ESPN. Joining us to talk about a little bit of that, a lot of spring ball, Sammy Mora, Ute Zone editor, friend of the program. Sammy, welcome back to the show. How are you?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Doing all right. 49 years in a row. Neither of us were born when this streak began. I was born a little bit closer to the beginning of this streak than you were, Sammy, but 49 years of consistency and success for the Red Rocks. What does it actually mean for the university, the athletic department, for the team itself?
I mean, Utah's the only program in collegiate gymnastics that has made it to every single national championship. Georgia was the only one who held that streak for a long time with the Utes, but then Georgia, had a few down years and they didn't make it to nationals. But it's just massive, just the stability in this program and the continued success that they've had. It was a little bit of a up and down meet on Saturday. There was times where it looked like Utah was dead in the water, but this team has such a strong drive and such a huge fight in them. And I think that they haven't won a national. They haven't lifted that trophy since 1995. So I think that they're every year they get a little bit closer. They've finished in third place the last 3 years, but I think there's a chance. I'm not saying outright they're gonna win, but I think that they have a good chance. They seem to be picking up speed when you need them to right now.
What kind of scores is it going to take? Like, what is the team going to have to look at the end of this thing if they're expecting or hoping to take down a national championship? Are we talking 198 plus?
Probably, if I had to guess. I think you need to be. Next Thursday is going to be massive for this team. You're in semifinal 2 with LSU, Michigan State, and UCLA, and the top 2 of that will advance to Final Four on the floor for Saturday. And I think that, you're going to need to be as perfect as possible because the margin for error every single meet, these last 2, just gets slimmer and slimmer. And so I'm not saying you need to go out and put up a 198-4 like Oklahoma did in their regional final to advance to the Final Four on the floor, but you need to be top 2. So I think you need to be, locked in. Like the girls need to, there was a lot of tenths they left out on the floor again on Saturday, just like they did on Thursday. Hops on dismounts. You have Avery have an unusual fall on bars. You have just some mistakes throughout the entire thing. And so I think that locking in and making sure you're zoned in on those landings and you're not leaving those tenths out on the floor because, if Utah falls behind, they're going to need to rely on the other teams ahead of them to make those mistakes. And LSU is a team that's not prone to a lot of mistakes. Same with Michigan State and with UCLA. These 4 teams are all very, very, very good. And so I think, you're going to need to be perfect for basically the entire meet. I'm not saying go out and get 10s on every single rotation, but just cut down on those steps, those balance checks, things like that are going to lead to those deductions.
Okay, so you just brought up something that I think applies across all sports, and it always interests me a lot because when you're talking about a team that is advancing and climbing and qualifying again for 49 straight national championship appearances for Utah, and you're also saying, but man, they're making some mistakes and they're leaving tenths out on the floor. There's a couple ways that I always interpret this. If you play your very, very best, if you perform your very, very best, and you're right on that borderline, and there's no obvious if you don't do this, then that score is even higher. If you don't do this, then you can improve. I get hopeful about that. But I also, there's the flip side of that coin where I look at it and I say, all right, I mean, at this point in the season, you would hope at least that a lot of those wrinkles are kind of ironed out in your performance and that you are rounding into best form at the right time and you're getting the very best. For Utah, which is more applicable in your mind? A team that, like, okay, they're making some uncharacteristic errors and mistakes, leaving some tenths out there that they won't at the highest level, or that you hope that they won't, or they shouldn't at nationals, or, you know, like, hey, why is it still happening? Is this really like the ceiling for this team?
I think, you know, Utah, this team is a very veteran team, but I think that, you know, like, there's always going to be those nerves despite being in these situations every single year for every single one of these girls on this team, except for Anna Potterairio, the UCLA transfer. She hasn't been to nationals in a couple of years because the Bruins failed to qualify a couple of years ago. But, you know, I think that there's always those mistakes and those nerves. And then when you have so many, you don't have a lot of freshmen, but we have Avery and Zoe who are carrying a good amount of weight on this team. Those nerves are going to set in. And this Utah team seems to be the group that at times they'll get ahead of themselves. And they'll start thinking about, okay, what's next, instead of just focusing on the rotation they're on, the event they're on. And I think that, you know, you've seen like that floor rotation where they were able to claw back from a third all the way to first on Saturday. That is what Utah needs to do this in, like, for the rest of the last two meets. They need to take it one routine at a time and basically forget about what happened in the previous rotation. Because with the first rotation, you start on bars, Avery falls, things kind of start getting a little bit, you know, questionable, but then Grace caps it off with her perfect 10, her back-to-back 10s in her last two meets of the Huntsman Center. And then Beam, you know, they kind of started out a little bit strong on Beam, but then things started to kind of tail off for a second when Cammie Winger had her routine that ended up being scored like a 9-6, I think. And then you kind of pick up a little bit of steam on the back half of the lineup with Grace and Avery. And then, you know, floor, they just kind of turned a page. And it was the Utah team that, you know, everyone has known that they can be, you know, putting up like a season-high score on floor, blowing the roof off the Huntsman Center, multiple girls on that floor rotation. Only one counting score lower than a 9-9. That's what Utah needs to do in all four rotations at nationals. And I think that sometimes they get excited and they get a little bit ahead of themselves. And so I think, you know, focusing one routine at a time, one rotation at a time it's just going to be massive for this group.
Is gymnastics well insulated from the transfer portal and from the NIL stuff that's going on in other sports?
It depends on the school and stuff. I think, you know, Utah has done a really good job at bringing in one transfer every single year the last 3 years. This year was Anna Potterairio from UCLA, but Anna actually walked onto the team. Her husband plays for Real Salt Lake, and so she elected to transfer to Utah to be closer to her husband. The year before that, it was Ashley Glynn, who we've seen take a massive step forward this year. And the year before that, it was Ashley Brenner. And I think Utah's very selective with who they bring in from the portal. You know, it's smaller roster sizes than in other sports, kind of similar numbers to both basketball programs. But, you know, Utah has been selective with bringing in girls that will, one, fit the culture, and two, will fit the areas of need that this team has. And so I think you'll see transfers here and there. I know Utah's swung with some big-time transfers the last few years. They weren't able to bring any in, but then, you know, obviously something didn't work. They didn't match the culture. They didn't match Utah's needs, stuff like that. And as for NIL, I know a lot of the girls, like Grace McCallum specifically, she's brokered a lot of her own deals outside of it. I know she has an NIL deal with Crocs and stuff, so it doesn't seem to be as much of a weight, NIL and stuff with gymnastics as it is for other schools or for other sports, I should say, because it seems like a lot of these girls, you know, there's no such thing as pro gymnastics unless you're like Simone Biles. And so I think a lot of these girls are seeing it as, you know, a way to get an education, a way to continue to compete and do the sport they love for 4 or maybe even 5 years if the 5-for-5 gets passed and stuff. So I think you see it's not as crazy. You're seeing more and more girls enter the portal every year, but it's never as crazy as it is in basketball or football and stuff. You'll see 1, maybe 2 high-profile girls enter the portal a year, but it's never anything like as insane as football or basketball.
Part of the reason I asked that question is because it's insane to me that somehow Oregon State has held on to Jade Carey. People who are Olympic gymnastics fans, I think that's most of our listeners probably only watch gymnastics in the Olympics, right? Will recognize that she's an Olympian. She's the best all-around gymnast in the country. She's the best balance beam, I guess that's arguable, balance beam gymnast in the country. And she's at a place where she can win individual championships, but she's not going to be competing for a team championship. So it's just amazing to me that one of these big SEC squads, or Utah, I guess, for that matter, hasn't been able to pull her away from Corvallis.
I think Jade's big thing is she wanted to go to a program where, and you see that with some girls, where they want to go and they want to be, the main focus. Or, like I said, it's academics. There's a lot of girls that want to go into certain majors, and so they go to the school that's offering them a scholarship that has the best program. Jade has always been very, very, very open about her love for Oregon State and stuff like that, and I don't think there was ever any doubt that she would ever leave Oregon State. And I know she's one of those girls that, you're seeing a lot more 4 and 5 stars commit to NC States, and I know BYU has a 5-star for next year, and there's girls that are starting to take their high-level talent to other programs because, maybe academically it's the best option for them, or they want to have the opportunity to compete in the all-around. Jade walked onto campus in Corvallis and was immediately top dog. Avery, for example, she walked onto campus at Utah, but as the number 1 recruit in the country for the class of 2024, but she still, had to work her way into the lineups because you had Grace McCallum, you had Emily Morgan, you had McKenna Smith, you had all these other high-level girls on campus. She went from being a big fish in a small pond to, okay, there's a bunch of big fish around me, so I need to put my head down and keep working and so I can compete. Whereas Jade was immediately big fish on campus at Oregon State. And so, it's interesting to see how different girls approach it because I know some girls approach it from an academic standpoint. Some girls approach it from a, want to compete for a title standpoint. Some girls approach it for I want to be the guy, so to speak, for this program. So it's kind of a gymnast-to-gymnast type basis, I think.
Well, hopefully Utah can pull off something and win a national championship because I'm so sick of the SEC taking home everything, all the hardware. Florida wins a national championship last night. The SEC is pretty dominant in gymnastics as well. We'll see. Fingers crossed for the Red Rocks. Let's switch gears. Sammy Mora is our guest here, Utes' own editor on the Sean O'Connell Show. Spring football happening right now, and the scrimmage that happened this past weekend, I was away on fight duties. I wasn't able to see or even yet hear about a lot of what happened there. So give me your perspective on how the spring football scrimmage, the Saturday scrimmage went for Utah football.
Yeah, I mean, I was really impressed with Devin Dampier and his playmaking ability. He had obviously you kind of expect that he has a good command of the offense, but he looks good. I think I don't want to say he's as advertised right now because obviously, it's a scrimmage. There's not a lot of, and especially in spring, there's not a lot of there's no contact allowed on the quarterbacks. So I think that, getting him in live action is going to be, another step in the right direction. But I liked his command of the offense. He had some very, very, very well placed balls throughout the scrimmage. He, as of right now, looks to be expected. The offensive line, was looking good as well, which you should expect from 5 returners all coming back for the offensive line. And then I think my other big standout was Bird Thicklin, the true freshman from Oklahoma. He came in. We saw him a little bit on Saturday, and he, he's shown some glimpses and some flashes of what he could do for this Utah offense. And I think, Kyle Whittingham mentioned him last week at practice about how he seems to have been finally, getting things going and stuff. And I think he's going to be, I don't want I don't want to jump the gun, because everyone jumping the gun with quarterbacks in freshman years is especially hard. But
what do you mean? We've never done that
him.
in here in Salt Lake City. You've never seen that happen around Utah football?
Hey, I said I told Scott last week. I said I try and take scrimmages and spring games with I said more than a grain of salt, but not too much because I brought up Charlie Brewer. Everyone thought he was the heir apparent after the spring game a couple years ago when he went 16 for 16, and then look how that ended up for Utah. But I think Bird has a great foundation of what he can do. For him being a lefty, he throws the ball in a very interesting way, and you'd think that it wasn't a good delivery from the ball, but he actually has very good placement. He had some good balls as well. And then I also think my biggest on the offense, at least my biggest one of my other standouts was Hunter Andrews. He looks to be really exciting for Utah. There was a bunch of different ways they used him, and I think that he could be, it's going to be interesting to see how they utilize him, Nate Johnson, guys that can play in different positions on the field and stuff. So I think the offense, there was some issues still. There were some drop balls, some misassignments, stuff like that. But like I said, you shouldn't expect the Utah offense to be at 100% without with the spring game not even being happened. I think there's 7 or 8 practices left this season for spring. People who are panicking about, offensive, us reporting that, there's wide receivers dropping balls, there was misassignments. I get the fear and stuff, but we are still so early in this whole process. So, and I think, I've said it before, I think you shouldn't have any fear about a Utah team coming together because they will come together. Even though they're not ready right this minute, they'll probably be ready by the time the season rolls around.
That's the hope, obviously. And look, there's 2 schools of thought with Utah football right now. There are some of the prognosticators, and we know how valuable predictions are because we, especially in the media, we like to talk about them. We like to make our lists. We like to do our preseason rankings. And then we have to throw it all away. Last year was an excellent lesson for all of us on that. Oklahoma State, highly thought of. Utah picked to win the conference, and it didn't exactly play out that way. So there's 2 schools of thought with Utah. Either, a lot of folks who are they trust in Kyle Whittingham. This is not just locally, nationally too. And they're like, look, it can't keep going the way it's gone. There's no way you're going to have this many significant injuries to this many important players for 3 consecutive seasons. The Utes will be back. Some people think they're right in the driver's seat to compete for a conference championship again. And then there's the other folks that are like, the ship has sailed, and Utah is going to be kind of like an also-ran. They won't be as bad as last year if they can mitigate the injury risk. Obviously, I'm a former Ute where this is the home of the Utes. I index more towards I trust that Kyle Whittingham is going to get this thing dialed in, that this team is going to come together, like you just said. But how prepared do we need to be for the possibility? How reliant is this team on individual talents on 1 or 2 or 3 players? And if that person goes out, then, we're talking about a sacrifice season for the 3rd year in a row.
I mean, I get that, and I see where fans are coming from in that instance, but I think the best way for me to phrase this, how I am attaching it and how I'm attacking that possibility is that, the odds of it happening 3 years in a row, I think, should be low, but it's not completely zero, and I think that people are probably like, okay, Sammy, why are you saying that? But at the same time, every time, last season, a lot of younger guys got the added experience, the live game reps, and, sometimes that's all they need to, start processing things faster. The game starts to slow down, all of these types of things. And so I think while it is kind of, but to a certain extent, every team relies on their quarterback. And, backup quarterbacks, good backup quarterbacks are hard to come by now, it seems like, at certain programs because, guys don't want to wait. Guys want to play instantly. They transfer, and it's just a cyclical – it's a terrible cycle that you have in college football right now. And I think, Utah has Isaac Wilson, who does have all that experience from last year. And, this offense is is a lot easier to process than I think an Andy Ludwig offense was. And so seeing him take a step in the right direction might, lessen the blow for some fans. And I think that, you need some guys to start stepping up around in other positions. Zach Williams on the wide receiver room, Dadrian Zipper in the wide receiver room. I think if Hunter Andrews gets things going, that helps the tight end room, because then you're not solely relying on Bentley and King. Your offensive line, your backups on the offensive line have had experience due to injuries last season, or, just garbage time experience. And so I think, there should be some solace in knowing that if someone was to go down, knock on wood, there is a lot of experience at other depth in that position. The linebacker room, there's a lot of depth. The only two that I can possibly see people having, those hesitations about are your defensive ends and your defensive tackles. I think your corners are making the steps you need to see them make. Your safety room is in a good position. But honestly, I think it should bring some solace and some comfort that, the added depth that you have that has experience, that's going to pay dividends as much as you want it to or not.
Sammy Mora for a few more minutes here on the Sean O'Connell Show talking Utah football. You just mentioned the linebackers. I spent, I don't know how many months last year. Well, not that many months because I didn't get the show back until July. But I spent a lot of time talking about Lander Barton and how my expectations for Lander Barton were just through the roof. And I failed to account for the fact that he was coming off a catastrophic injury, and that could not only affect him from a health standpoint, a physical standpoint, but mentally it can affect the guy's play because, they're more careful, they're more hesitant, things like that. And I think we saw that last year, especially in the games where there was no Karene Reed, where Lander had a hard time playing free and just being 100% himself. In the tail end of the season, one of the bright spots in a season where there weren't a lot of bright spots is you saw Lander kind of returning to some of his playmaking ways. And I think getting more comfortable with the idea that he was actually 100% back from the injury. And we had his sister in studio last week, and she mentioned that she feels he is kind of in that mental space now where he knows that he's good. He knows that the injury is not something you have to be overly concerned about. Bad luck can happen twice, but it's within his control, so to speak. How high should the expectations be for Lander Barton this year?
I think that, you bring up a good point is that, he was coming off the injury. When Karene wasn't out there, he seemed to be struggling and stuff. And I think that Lander's one of those guys that, I think Utah fans should be very excited about seeing this fall. I think that the injury was a big part. I think that also having that, when Karene went down, the added responsibility of being the green dot, I think that kind of, threw him for a loop for a little bit, because he was, and I know people are like, well, you need to adapt and change as the season goes on and stuff. But I think having someone, I think it's going to be massive for him that Le'Veon's coming back, that Jono is still in the room, Trey Reynolds. There's a lot of guys in that room that, can help make the linebacker room as a whole better. Teams know what to expect from Lander. And so, sometimes, that puts that added pressure on him. And I think that, there should be, I'm not saying that he's going to be a finalist for the Butkus Award, which he very well could, honestly. But I think that, having Le'Veon back, you kind of assume that Le'Veon is going to have that green dot role on this defense and stuff. That lets Lander play free. He's not worried about what other people are doing. He's just worried about himself. I mean, that's not to say that he won't, help with green dot responsibilities as one of the veterans on this defense, but being that green dot is a lot of extra pressure. And so I think the expectation for Lander should be, I think he's going to be playing a lot better than he did last season, but I'm going to personally say, okay, I'm not going to say he's going to be, Butkus Award winner, all these things, because I want to see how he does get back out there. The little bit, like when we've seen him in the scrimmage, he looks like Lander of old, but that's, again, not in a live experience. You're playing against an offensive line. You're playing against, you're not tackling, you're not following through on all those things. So I think Lander should be much improved from last season, but I'm personally, I'm gonna pump the brakes on any like sweeping generalizations for, you know, accolades and stuff like that for him for next year.
That's very fair and reasonable. I'm expecting him to be Devin Lloyd, so I will be the opposite end of the spectrum. But I was wrong about it last year. Hopefully, I'm not this year. Before we let you go, Sammy, inspired by the disastrous finish for Houston last night, and one player, Sharp, not getting a shot off and then not being able to touch the ball because it would have been a travel, is going to live with him for the rest of his life. And as a former athlete, as a sports fan, I think a lot of people have those plays, those moments in sports that they will never forget, whether it was watching it or being a part of it. There's just something that's burned into your brain. I put the question out earlier, and a couple of text messages came back that, like, Cam Rising running into a table for at least one person is burned into their brain forever, and they'll never get over it. I actually think that the concussion in the Rose Bowl was more that for me with Cam Rising. But is there one of those moments, either in your own personal life or with Utah Athletics or whatever, wherever, Sammy, that you're just a sports play, a sports moment that you are never going to forget, even if you wanted to?
Oof. Okay, that's a very loaded question for me. Because I'm a Tampa Bay Buccaneers fan, so
Okay.
there's quite a few of those moments that, you know, are drilled into my mind. Way too many to count, honestly. But I think if we're talking Utah athletics specifically, I think one that's very recent for me was last year at Nationals for the gymnastics team. You have a lead. You are in first place heading into the final rotation of Nationals. You're finishing on vault, and they proceed to sit down back-to-back vaults, which drop them all the way from first to third. I think for me, that is probably most recently one of the biggest ones that I can think of. If you gave me more time, I could probably rattle off, 4 or 5, but recent memory, Utah Athletics, that's probably mine, because they were last year's national championship. There's no Oklahoma, Florida's looking mid. LSU was struggling at that point, and then you sit down 2 vaults and you open the door for LSU and for Cal, and they took advantage of it, and they finished first and second for LSU. Came home with one of their first natties in a while. So I think recently that's probably my biggest one that kind of is sitting in my mind is that Nationals rotation last year.
That's bad enough. That one makes perfect sense. Sammy, appreciate your time and your perspective. Thank you. See you soon.
Thank you. See you later.
Sammy Mora, editor over at Ute Zone. Utah Spring football is covered by, us at ESPN 700, by our great friends and partners in the business who we bring in as Utah insiders, part of our Big 12 at noon coverage, brought to you by Mountain Supply. And spring football coverage brought to you by Jersey Mike's and Advanced Window Products. Find more details at ESPN700sports.com. And always, when you go to Jersey Mike's, get it Mike's way. Tell them Mosi sent you. When you call Advanced Window Products, 801-850-9100, tell them Mosi sent you. A lot of interesting stuff there from Sammy. And Utah is going to be – they're going to be using some Swiss Army knives, it sounds like, this year in the offense. I put a question out there on the Twitter poll. Nate Johnson in particular has been talked about as the Swiss Army knife by Kyle Whittingham. He used that exact terminology. That's a utility player. That's someone who's going to be lining up in the slot probably, maybe doing a little wildcat situation, maybe playing traditional quarterback. What else? How many touches do we want to see that type of player, Nate Johnson or Hunter Andrews or whoever? How many touches do you want to see that kind of player get in the Utah offense? We'll discuss that next on the Sean O'Connell Show. ESPN 700, 92.1 FM, proud part of Utah's ESPN radio network. All right, at Real OC Sports, that's where you find the poll, the questions that I put up each day. The poll question today actually not sports related that maybe we can get to for, 90 seconds. A more salient Utah football question. You've heard in this spring football camp a lot of conversation about versatility, players who could be weapons. Swiss Army knife is this term that's being used a lot. Sammy Moore just came on, and we talked about Hunter Andrews. Running back in high school, started out as a linebacker at the University of Utah because, newsflash, that's what they do when you're a white running back. They move you to linebacker in college.
Well, and particularly if you're as massive as Hunter Andrews
especially if you're
is, too.
6'3" 235 pound white running back, they say you're going to be a good linebacker for us. Pretty much everyone does that.
I think it was our guy Kyle Gunther, your former teammate, who was when he was on the air here on ESPN 700 in the afternoon show. I remember him saying Chase Hansen came in as a high school quarterback, and he said, bless his heart, he still thought he could be a college quarterback, and the coaches let him pursue that. But the whole time they were saying, no, dude, you're a linebacker.
Dude, so
like, look in the mirror, you're a linebacker. That's kind of what happened with Hunter Andrews too, and now they're experimenting with him at tight end and more on the offense this year. But it's like, okay, man, you think you're a running back, but look at you.
He was more right. It turns out
the
Chase
flipped
Hansen thing was funny because you could find it. When Chase Hansen was a quarterback, I asked Kyle Whittingham probably 5 times, when does he be moved to defense? And Coach Witt would do the lip service and say, no, he's a good player, right? And then he went on his mission. He came back from his mission, and I was like, oh, wait, they really are going to let him play quarterback because the coaching staff went and picked him up from the airport. You don't do that for a linebacker or a safety.
Yeah, that's a good point.
You do that for a quarterback.
You
all
think
right?
that would indicate they think he's the next starting quarterback.
And then when he wasn't the starting quarterback, I was like, okay, so when is he going to move? When is he going to play? And then they were like, okay, he's a safety now. And it's like everyone except Chase Hansen knew.
Yeah.
It's like, when is he going to be a linebacker though? Because in the NFL, he's going to be a linebacker. He was an amazing safety.
Yeah, he was all conference
at
safety.
At the high school level and at the college level, he was an unreal safety. But the progression, this is what happens, and everyone knows this now. The higher you climb the ladder, right, the bigger you have to get. Unless you are like the blazing fastest dude on the planet, well, you better add some size and play the position bigger than you, right? If you're a great, like an oversized linebacker in high school, the coaching staff is going to take you and turn you into a defensive end, right? If you're a big defensive lineman, they're going to be like, well, let's see how good you are. You know what? We're actually going to move you to offensive tackle, Sam Tevy, right? There's just like, if you're a tall defensive lineman, a lot of times they're just going to move you to the position that fits your physical profile best. Hunter Andrews is a guy, look, he had offers from everywhere. Utah is lucky to have an athlete like that on their roster. This is an 11-second 100, 235-pound. Like, he ran track, right? Now, he's not winning a track race against Nate Johnson, but he's also 235 pounds.
Yeah.
And by the way, by the time he gets through the summer lifting program, if they're actually going to have him be tight end, which is the position he's listed at on
more of the Brant Keithy role. That's where he's technically listed as tight end, but a lot more versatile than that. Yeah.
There's Utah has had these guys, right? Ben Moa, if you go back far enough, Ben Moa was a tight end who could play running back, who could play quarterback, who could play everything. Right? He was a crazy versatile athlete. He's like 270 pounds, right? Hunter, I don't know what the physical size you need from him. Do you want to lean into he's got like deceptive quickness? See what I did there? Because he's white, deceptive quickness. Or do you want to lean into the fact that like this dude is a tank, and now you've had those guys on the roster in the past that are like fullbacks, like real ones.
Yeah, I think the plan is to certainly play him in that fullback, running back role at times too.
Yeah. And in that case, right, and you should, if you're him, you should be thinking about, all right, well, how can I be most useful in this offense, but also what about the next level? He's a fullback in the NFL if he's anything in the NFL, right? He's not at 6'3", 235, he's not a tight end. He's like the Richard guy from Baltimore who's 265 pounds.
Or if a team sees that he has enough ball skills, maybe he's a use check type fullback too, that's a little bit bigger, right?
He's already a little bit big, like his use check is not.
He's not that big. He's more of a he's a lot more slight than Richard for sure in Baltimore.
Yeah,
but
maybe is 6'1", 230.
Yeah.
So, all right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So okay. Look, we're not talking about Hunter Andrews' pro prospects just yet, but what we are talking about, the Swiss Army knife, Nate Johnson, Hunter Andrews, maybe those guys. Unfortunately, in a lot of cases, you're a gimmick player, and I don't mean that as a pejorative term, but like you have anywhere from 5 to 10 opportunities in a game to actually touch the ball. You're not going to be used any more than a second or third wide receiver.
Yeah, you're not in there every down.
They feel like more impactful plays because oftentimes they're gadget plays. Oftentimes they're like the home run swing from an offensive coordinator. Like, all right, let's try this.
They're unique enough that they stand out in everyone's minds. Yeah.
Yes.
When they're good.
But most times it's like 5-ish reps. In this offense, knowing what little we know about, the way they're actually going to run the offense, how good Wayshawn Parker actually is, how good the running back room actually is, I think we feel confident and can feel confident reasonably that the offensive line is going to be able to handle whatever you throw at them, whatever you're asking them to do, they should be all right doing. We don't know what the wide receiver room really looks like. You don't know if this team, like has unfortunately been the case the last couple of years for Utah, is going to be like, you're going to have to run against an 8-man box because you got nothing that can keep my safeties cautious. Nothing. Like, I don't think that's going to be the case this year. My fingers are crossed that that's not going to be the case this year. And if it's not going to be the case this year, it might not be because you have somebody like Andrews who, let's just call him the Brant Keithy role, right?
Yeah.
He can create weird mismatches for linebackers, potentially.
Pass catcher, runner, whatever.
I don't know how good he is at catching the ball. I don't.
He did have like a 60-yard
right?
touchdown catch and run in the scrimmage. So as Sammy pointed out, he made a few plays in the passing game that made you go, okay. But again, spring football scrimmage. We're taking it with a ton of salt.
Yeah, not a grain of salt. Like it's like those
spring football scrimmage with a brand new offense.
You take it with the Himalayan salt lamp, that pink thing that you put the light bulb inside and it glows nicely. That's larger than a grain.
The call of the void may or may not have you going, should I just lick that? Because it is salt. No. Don't.
Have you ever done it?
I have not. Have you?
You know what it tastes like?
What does it taste like?
Salt.
Oh.
Like, it's salt.
Yeah.
You ever use one of those the salt plates that you can like grill your food directly on the salt slab? It's a great way to feel fancy without actually. They're like $30, so it's not like this insane thing that you have to like.
But you feel fancy.
You feel very fancy because you put this huge slab of salt on the grill and it heats directly and salts directly. I don't think it's. I mean, it's honestly. It's not that efficient because
it doesn't salt it any better than sprinkling salt on it before.
Like when you really think about it, it's a much more complicated way of salting your food than just sprinkling salt on it, because then you gotta, you slap this steak on the slab and then like you've got all the steak juices on your source of salt. It'd be like pouring your steak juice into your salt shaker. You'd be like, oh well, that's. I don't know if that's the best way to do it. So it's a more complicated way.
Yeah.
In any case, take it with that level of salt.
Yeah.
Whatever you see in spring.
That's why we were talking about salt.
But I'm very curious to know. We don't have the tendencies for Coach Beck yet. We don't. We don't know if he's a guy who's like twice a quarter, 3 times a quarter. I'm bringing out something that, a gadget play, something that's going to be crazy. The offensive linemen are going to go in motion. Like, we don't know. You can go back and you can watch New Mexico film, and you're going to see a much, I think, a pretty, I don't want to say predictable, I don't want to say vanilla, but like it looks like a regular college offense. There's not like all this insanity going on. I also don't think at New Mexico he had these players.
Yeah, as he told us on the show, his offense is designed to adjust to the roster that he has, the talent that he has. So this could be almost exactly what we saw at New Mexico. This could be completely different from what we saw at New Mexico.
And you also now have to certainly watch New Mexico film and see what Devin Dampier especially is really good at, but also remember his offensive line is better than the one at New Mexico, significantly. Also remember, though, that he's now playing for a head coach who has lost his star quarterback to injury the last couple of years and is probably subconsciously or consciously a little bit more cautious with allowing that quarterback to run. As great as Devin Dampier is at running, he's a running back who can throw the ball. Like he's got
that's the kind
vision,
of runner he is, yeah.
Ability, like he's fast.
And we've seen that in our limited media viewing. We saw that, as Sammy talked about, at the scrimmage where we got to see the whole thing. Like, you can see that he has that kind of vision and all that makes him a special runner.
But how many times are you going to let him get like pushed out of bounds and go skidding towards a table before you're like, you know what? No more of that.
You just triggered our texter again. Like, my goodness.
You see what I did there? I don't know if you can hear that over the air, but I'm always knocking on wood.
Oh, yeah.
This is, by the way, I don't think this desktop that we have, I don't think this is real wood.
Don't say that.
I think there's some kind of...
Don't jinx it as you're trying to anti-jinx.
This is particle board. I don't know what this is. Anyway.
Paper or something.
So that's one of the fascinating things. One of the fun levels of fascination for me. There's a lot of things about Utah football and prognosticating for next year that are just like worry related for folks. Yeah. This one, though, it's like, okay, you have this guy who's a former all-district running back, a 5A MVP in Texas high school football, who was also a standout in track, who wants to be a weapon for your offense, wanted to be a great linebacker for you, but instead is going to be a better fit.
At least this year they feel he's a better fit on the offensive side, yeah.
And you've also got, Nate Johnson, who's returned to your program, which is such a weird thing about this new era of college football, who's a guy with like true breakaway speed that you might just trot that guy out there once in a while and just be like, run a 9 route and just make the defensive backfield feel like they have to run with you. Just be the fastest guy on the field today. And he's capable of more than that. You don't just need to use him as a decoy. But if you've got the option of, and it sounds like, they're not, there's a couple other, Bray sounds like he wants to have something to say about who the fastest guy on the team actually is.
He's a guy certainly has that quick twitch when we, in the little bit we've seen, that's certainly on display.
But again, you're not going to see Utah football operate in a vacuum of 2025 only. Kyle Whittingham is still going to be on that headset being like, look at that box count, get those dudes out of there. And then the coaching staff, the offensive coaching staff, is going to have to say, all right, whether we think that Devin's going to hit this throw or not, we're going deep. We're going to run Nate Johnson or whoever else, okay? Whitmore, I don't care who it is. We're going to find our fastest couple of guys, and we're going to run them past their guys so that they don't feel like they can just operate in this phone booth with us and make our offensive line's job harder. All of that fascinates me about when we get to Utah football's actual participation. What we can see in spring ball will help influence our predictions. What we actually see week 4, week 5 in the season, and then we get a chance to know what the ideas really are, that's going to be like, do we see 10 touches a game for the guys that are sort of positionless? Or do you go back to the old well and say we're going to throw the ball to our tight ends and our wide receivers, we're going to hand the ball to our running backs, we're going to let our versatile quarterback be a versatile quarterback, and Nate Johnson, thanks for coming back. You're an emergency option only. Hunter Andrews, thanks for moving positions and going wherever the team can use you, but we don't know what that role looks like for you until we get to the goal line, so see you then. I don't think it's going to be that way. I think it's going to be more the former, where they're just like, okay, let's see what we can do here. Let's get a dozen touches to guys that we've identified as athletic talents and playmakers. And I am hoping and praying that that's the kind of offense we're looking at come fall.
It'll be fun. It'll be so much fun if that's the kind of offense that we see in the fall, and such a difference from what we saw with Andy Ludwig, even in the best years under Andy Ludwig. It'll be a lot of fun if that's what we get to see.
All right, got to take a quick one here, going way too long. James, I'm so bad at the clock, and you as my producer are in big trouble. All right?
I'm sorry, boss. I should have reminded you again. Oh, sorry, I shouldn't have said again.
Yeah, see? Dang it. The new field at America First Square. Have you seen the pictures of this thing for Salt Lake Bees baseball?
I haven't checked out the pictures. I'm going to have to look them up in the break.
You get a lot of superfluous statements when there's a new thing going on in town. These are Major League Baseball level facilities. I'm not going to lie. The first time I heard that, I was like, okay, guys. Have you been to some of these Major League Baseball parks? They are modern-day cathedrals that are built for the express purpose of good sight lines and fan enjoyment and clubhouse luxury. And then you see the tours and the pictures for the field at America First. This thing is outrageous. Salt Lake Bees Baseball, SLBs.com for all your information, the gear, the logos, the tickets, the opening. It's today. It's opening day.
Happy opening day for baseball's second opening day for minor leagues.
Minor League Baseball's opening day. Get yourself out to the field at America First Square. This is an unbelievable facility. And the hope is that as much as we love Smith's Ballpark and as beautiful as that backdrop is for Smith's Ballpark, the photos I've seen, the videos I've seen, the drone footage I've seen, as good, I'm so hesitant to say better with the new facility because of my love for Bees tradition. But, guys, we have to give it a shot. Bees Baseball, again, is here. SLBs.com. Tell them OC sent you. Take the family out. They got Bark at the Park nights. They've got a bunch of themed things. They've got 3 Abejas nights that are home games. They're doing special deals on the grass seats again. It's just it's going to be an incredible experience with baseball back. And we got to get ourselves geared up for the eventuality in the next 5 or so years of Major League Baseball touching down in Salt Lake City. So let's be a baseball town with the SLBs.com action. Lots left to get to on the Sean O'Connell Show. Shahan Jayaraja joining us in about 8 minutes to talk the upcoming NFL Draft. It's ESPN 700, 92.1 FM. I don't know if you've seen this, but a new survey out from Smith Entertainment Group on what the Utah Hockey Club should be named next year. It's now Utah Hockey Club, Mammoth, or Dire Wolves because they brought back the Dire Wolf in real life. So I was lying about the new poll. I think we're going to get an announcement before the draft.
Dire Wolves. Yeah.
But you saw the headline. Most people, I think, have seen the headline. I asked a poll question about this at Real OC Sports if you want to vote on the poll. Dire Wolves, there's a company called Colossal, all right? This is a genetics bioengineering company.
They're the real-life InGen.
From Jurassic Park.
Jurassic Park fan.
They are trying to bring back extinct species, including the dire wolf, which was a real animal from the Ice Age, effectively, 10,000 years ago. Now, I don't love the lap of success that they're taking right now and being like, the dire wolf is back, because what they did is they genetically engineered gray wolves to have, like, foofier tails, like a dire wolf did. Also, for those who are not familiar with actual dire wolves and are familiar with the dire wolves of Game of Thrones fame, real dire wolves are not like 8 times as big as a dog. They're regular size wolves.
Oh,
they're not freakishly enormous wolves like
not
in
near it.
Westeros.
Well, not near as cool that they brought him back then. Sorry.
So they have Arctic fur capable of handling Arctic conditions. And they have thick tails, and they have some of these things that this company, I'm not going to disparage any of the work. It's really, really fascinating what they're able to do with genetic sequencing. And it is fiction, science fiction coming to life.
Yeah.
A lot of the topics, a lot of the
no
things
mosquitoes or amber needed.
A lot of things that Michael Crichton wrote about in Jurassic Park are in principle the same things being done by Colossal and by the cloning lab at Harvard under George Church. Like these things are wild, man. They're really, really cool. They're trying to bring back the thylacine, which is the Tasmanian tiger.
Oh, okay.
Which is a marsupial that kind of looks half wolf, half dingo, half tiger. You've seen it.
Hyena-ish too.
Yeah, very hyena-ish. Yeah, it's probably a better analogy. So there are people, myself among them, who think that there is actually a surviving population of thylacines in the remote portions of Tasmania. But in any case, this company's trying to bring those back, and that is going to happen. They're like within the target dates. They know that in our lifetime we will see an animal that's been extinct since the early 1900s will be restored. They will have the thylacine back.
That's not the Tasmanian devil, is it? Is
no,
that the animal they call that?
No, the Tasmanian devil is its own animal.
Oh, okay, that's what I figured. Okay.
Their population, by the way, is
that dwindling too?
Is dwindling because of unfortunately STIs.
Oh.
Yeah. These animals are like infecting one another.
Dang.
Like it's crazy. So in
Makes
any
you
case,
think of Looney Tunes a lot differently.
The question I asked on that's terrible. The question I asked at Real OC Sports is, are you cool with these de-extinction efforts? Or is this a little bit scary and, we're playing God too much? I also threw in the option you just don't care, because there are some people who see these scientific developments and they're just like, don't care, don't care.
Whatever.
Doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Because the woolly mammoth is coming back in our lifetime. It's going to happen. The thylacine, it sounds like they're going to be able to bring back. The dire wolf,
Ryan Smith's going to bring back the woolly mammoth.
Yeah. So here's the thing. Thylacines, right, these Tasmanian tigers, they were around when video cameras were around. De-extincting them is like, yeah, we were a big part of why they went away.
Yeah.
I'm not.
You could say the dodo as well.
Yeah, I'm not.
Thing.
Yeah, dodos actually. The fact that dodos ever survived is incredible. They were like worthless beings, right? Like slow reproducing, unable to defend themselves, lay their eggs literally on the ground. They had no defense mechanism. Dodos were wiped out by rats. It's like anyway. So like animals like that, I'm like, okay. I don't buy into the theory that humans hunted woolly mammoths into extinction. There were thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of woolly mammoths. And there were like 10,000 total human beings on planet Earth back in those days. I don't think that humans hunted mammoths to extinction. So I'm probably cool with de-extincting a mammoth too. I don't know if beyond that, it's a good idea to bring back animals that like natural selection, for lack of a better term, that the progress of the Earth's aging has eliminated from existence. But I'm here to listen to the arguments that if human beings were the cause of an extinction, why not bring it back?
Yeah, that's fair. Jurassic Park is, and I know it's totally fictional. It is a work of fiction, but that has completely soured me on the idea of bringing back anything extinct. So, but here's the thing. I'm almost willing to say, as long as you don't bring back carnivorous dinosaurs, go for it. Because that's just too much can go wrong.
For everyone out there who think like dinosaurs are not going to be an option because we cannot actually get DNA from dinosaurs.
Oh, the mosquito.
They turn into
thing.
stone.
Not real.
If there was maybe, I guess it is possible, there could be a dinosaur frozen into like the giant ice cube of Antarctica or something. That is a theme in one of the Ice Age movies.
That's true. So why not? No, yeah. So setting aside the dinosaur thing that everyone is going to in response to this, but we were talking about this off air before this segment. There are, and maybe this doesn't apply to things like the Tasmanian tiger, which was a little over 100 years ago when extinct, but certainly there's a lot of extinct animals that this is nowhere near the same planet that they lived on, and I just don't know that that's good for the animals.
Yeah, well,
bring them back.
They brought DNA from a 13,000-year-old tooth from a direwolf and a 72,000-year-old skull from a direwolf. The world is significantly different than it was in those days. The other thing
air
about
quality alone is different.
The other thing about this that is really interesting, and we're going to get to a break. Shahan J. Raj is going to join us at the top of hour number 3. The other thing about this is you have to realize that the end goal is not to bring back a direwolf or a thylacine or a mammoth. It is to be able to master gene editing and to be able to selectively choose traits in animals. That's how they're going to bring back the woolly mammoth. They've sequenced the DNA from well-preserved mammoths. There's a great book about this called Woolly. It's a true book. They've sequenced the DNA from well-preserved mammoths, and they can highlight the genes that gave them long hair, huge tusks, the right blood cell count, the right red blood cell count to survive in harsh environments, all these things. They've been able to isolate those genes, and then they're just going to edit the genes of an Asian elephant so that it becomes a modern-day woolly mammoth. If they can do that with mammoths, they're going to do it with people. That's the end goal here. That's where I get a little bit freaked out with the playing God situation because they're going to be like
applications to humans.
We know what gives you a high IQ. What gene gives you a high IQ? We know what gives you exceptional height. We know what gives you those high cheekbones and low body fat percentage. Like they're going to start gene editing us. That's where I get a little bit freaked out. Anyway, let's get back to sports. Shahan J. Rogers is going to join us next. We'll talk the upcoming NFL draft. It's the Sean O'Connell Show on ESPN 700, 92.1 FM.
same team. I mean, I don't think they made a 3 yet either. We haven't made a 3. It's nerves. It's fun. It's championship night. It's in the middle of the January against Sasquatch State. I mean, it's national championship. They're going to be nerves.
What conference is Sasquatch State in?
Bert, I was 5-0 against Sasquatch.
That was Kelvin Sampson from last night's national championship game. Sound courtesy of CBS Sports. By the way, another thing that they could engineer genetically, all right, Colossal Biosciences, they could genetically engineer. If they can bring back the dire wolf, they could give us real Sasquatch, and you could actually have a Sasquatch state. I should get a degree from there. Let's talk a little football. Let's talk a little college sports. Shehan Jayaraja joins us from CBS Sports, national college football writer. He's been tweeting a lot about basketball, so I think we could probably cover some of that with Shehan as well. Shehan, welcome back to the show. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
How do you feel about this, the return of extinct animals? We were just talking about that. The dire wolf sort of is back. They're going to bring back the Tasmanian tiger, woolly mammoth, etc. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like there was a movie about this in the 90s, and it doesn't always go so hot. So I don't know. I mean, listen, I think that anything we can do to obviously help the environment is probably a good thing, but let's just be careful what we wish for.
I think that's where we stand as a show as well. Let's talk about actual sports. Last night, if you're a Houston Cougar basketball fan, you had a nightmare scenario unfold over the final, several minutes of that game, but especially that last 5 or so seconds where Sharp is not able to get a shot off and then has to watch the ball bounce in front of him. If he touches it again, it's a travel. That is going to be burned into his mind, Kelvin Sampson's mind, Houston basketball fans' mind. I'm probably not going to forget it. For you, is there a sports memory where you just, no matter what, you'll remember it till the day you die, whether you want to forget it or not? It could be something that you watched. It could be something that you participated in yourself. It feels like we watched that unfold last night for Houston fans, for the coaches and players on that Houston team. That's something that you just never, ever get over. Do you have one of those?
Yeah, unfortunately, it's back in 2012. I'm a Chicago Bulls fan when Derrick Rose tore his ACL and was on the baseline. And obviously, look, you thought maybe it's like a 1-year thing. It turns out it's like a permanent thing, right? Where they really have never gotten back to that moment. Like, you look at the Bulls, like they haven't actually been a competitive team for the 13 years since then. So yeah, that will always be one that's burned into my mind. The thing with that too is that I actually, turned it off to go. I think it was my mom's birthday that day. We had to go run some errands. And so I actually got like 20 text messages in like 5 minutes to turn it on. And so, yeah, that's one that unfortunately will stick with me for a very long time.
Wait, so were these text messages telling you need to turn this on to see the worst thing that you're ever going to see? Or were they just telling you, hey, turn on the Bulls game, and you were like tuning back in thinking it was going to be some highlight or something incredible?
It was a lot of people texting me just no context, like, oh my God, and things like that.
No.
where everybody assumed that I knew what was going on, and I didn't at that moment. So again, that was a tough day.
So did you tune in thinking you were going to see greatness, and instead you got devastation?
Well, and no, I mean, the thing is too, right? Like, they were up by 12 points at the time. Like, it was an easy win. The Bulls were the 1 seed. They had the best record in the NBA. So, I just thought that it was going to be more of the same, but unfortunately not.
Wild. All right. So we've been talking. We've had you on the show a couple of times, and your main focus is college football. One of the interesting things, and I think we did discuss this previously, was the way that teams are handling spring football. And, Coach Prime, leave it to him. He does this for us. He gives us talking points all the time. But, he made overtures to, make spring football a lot more meaningful and to do like the NFL does in their camps, to do joint practices with another program. Syracuse stepped up and said, yeah, we'll do that. And then the NCAA came in and said, no, we're not actually going to do that right now. How much of the right now is the important point there? Is this something we're going to get in the future once there could be more logistical planning, and we could take a deeper look at this. Can spring football be resurrected and helped by the ideas of Coach Prime?
I think it can. And the fact that there were two programs, and I'll also say Texas Tech with Joey McGuire, who's a longtime friend of Deion Sanders, he also stepped up to say, we're open to doing this. We're open to traveling as well. So I think that this is something that is going to start to gain momentum. Now, look, there are going to be a couple different aspects about this, right? Because you do have some programs and some coaching staffs that I think will want to, per se, be in the shadows. They don't want to show off their kids. They don't want to show off their players. And certainly, I mean, look, here's the reality too, right? If you have 3 days of practices against another program, that's 3 days for the opposing coaching staff to also scout guys on your roster.
Exactly,
and
yeah.
So I think there will be coaches who are just not attracted to that. But you know, it's so funny to be sitting here, obviously heading into year 3 of the Deion Sanders era. And obviously when it first happened, I kind of thought it was a little bit of a joke. But one thing that I think that he has really brought to the forefront of college football is that we have moved away in so many ways. At this moment, when we're asking so much from fans, we are taking things away from fans more than ever before. Like the idea that a fan of a medium level college football team at the power conference level can't go to a spring game to watch their third stringers run drills. Like, it's kind of crazy, right? Like, it's kind of ridiculous when you really think about it. And I think that Deion Sanders obviously is a showman. He's somebody who understands the fan experience, understands the entertainment product. And so I do think that, I mean, and by the way, I will say specifically in the Big 12, which is a league that I think is aiming to be fan-focused and fan-friendly, I do think we're going to start to see more push towards this, and potentially maybe by 2026 we'll have further conversations.
How much revenue could be associated with this? Because that ultimately is what gets an idea across the finish line in any sport is, can I enrich my program, my university, my NIL fund, whatever? Will television networks have significant interest in showing the spring football game between Colorado and Texas Tech, or between Utah and Utah State, if that's a way for some of these smaller programs to monetize themselves? Is this something that there's going to be a fan and media appetite for that can create meaningful revenue for these programs?
Yeah, I wouldn't be super optimistic that there's going to be some fundamental change in revenue. Now, I will say, right, like sometimes when you have these spring games, they are expenses for the program. There's something that, you have to hire staff for the day and do whatever else, and a lot of them are free to the fans. I think that we will certainly reach a point where you're certainly not losing money over these sorts of games, and you'll be able to cover the cost of travel or whatever else via it. But I think that the bigger opportunity is the opportunity for exposure and opportunity for brand building. And I talked about it before. Like, I have a young child, and last year I got to take her to SMU spring game, which was a game it was at a local high school. It wasn't even at SMU's facility, but it was free. It was a great opportunity to go out. It's still at this point the only game that I've been able to take my daughter to. And, again, it was an SMU game that we got to experience. And I think that those sort of opportunities, especially for people with young families, is something that I think that we shouldn't take for granted in terms of building long-lasting relationships with the program. The reality is most Ohio State fans won't necessarily get to sit in row 4 whenever it's the fall. And so the fact that they can kind of do this and enjoy it, I think that that's a cool opportunity that shouldn't be taken for granted, even if the revenue from it is only modest.
I'm totally with you on that front, because I also have young children, and the idea of, trying to drag them to a night game and the parking and all that crazy stuff, when you have little kids, I think everyone who's had little kids understands, like, a spring game is perfect. They get to run down on the field afterward. It's such a casual event. And then they felt like you got to go to a game with dad, or that that dad took them to work or whatever it is. And that's something, for no other reason. I want spring football in Salt Lake City to live forever. If that's the only reason that it's around, I'm happy with that. So I totally understand what you're saying in that world. So as we take a look at Utah football, we had one of our Utah football insiders on earlier today, and there is this there's a sentiment that seems to be split with Utah football about like a lot of folks, and I'm talking from the national perspective, are like, oh yeah, like it's they won't have injury problems 3 years in a row, and this is a Kyle Whittingham coach team, and they brought in what we think is the solution offensively, so they're back and competing for a national championship. That's probably unrealistic, but there's also the other side of things where it's like, well, it's the game's passed him by, and this team is not going to be what it ever was. Kyle Whittingham needs to retire. That's not realistic either, and I suppose there's a whole spectrum of people in between those two extremes. Where do you sit with Utah football? Hearing if you've heard anything out of spring football that, like, everyone's kind of gelling and the offense is coming together, but that's the case in spring football. Your expectations for 2025 under Kyle Whittingham and what might be his last year?
Well, I think you have to preface, right, that Cameron Rising is one of the greatest players to ever play for Utah, but the fact that he was slated as a quarterback and that they made decisions around him the last 2 years ultimately set back the program in major ways. They didn't have they didn't have the kind of backups that they needed to have the past couple of years because they didn't realize that they'd need to have them potentially be starting quarterbacks, right? The way that the offense was structured was built around him. Everything was built around the idea of him being in the lineup. And I think that while obviously nobody loves the way that it ended, I think the fact that they're moving forward and picking a new direction is a real positive. And, obviously we've heard a little bit that the future head coach in waiting, Morgan Scalley, it was part of the decision-making process to bring in this new offensive staff with Jason Beck and with Devin Dampier at quarterback. And I think that just from that perspective, like, that, again, is commitment towards doing something. And so, look, I think the most interesting question about Utah heading into next year is going to be how quickly that offense comes along. Is Devin Dampier ready for this level? We know that he's going to be able to run at a high level the second that he gets in, but can he pass at a Big 12 level? I think is going to be fascinating. But even if it's just fine, even if it's just league average offensively, I think that puts Utah in a much, much better position than they've been the last 2 years, where they've had in the Pac-12 and the Big 12 two of the worst offenses each of the past 2 seasons. I just think that the floor for this offense is so much higher than what it was last season, where, again, you're talking about 15th or 16th in the Big 12 in almost every category. So from that perspective, if the defense is able to continue to reload, like, this should be a team that is in the middle of the pack in the Big 12, that does have a chance to be one of those teams heading into late October and November to still be in the conversation. Now, I think that there's certainly a step, maybe a step and a half behind the top of the league right now, but all you want is a chance at the end of the year, and I do think that Utah will be there.
Shahan Jayaraja, CBS Sports, my guest here on the Sean O'Connell Show for a few more minutes. Who is the top of the league in the Big 12? We learned a lot about expectations and how inaccurate we can be on those in last season, as Arizona State won it all after being picked dead last in the preseason poll. So who is, in your mind, the top of the Big 12 conference?
Yeah, it was humbling to do my picks over/under win totals just last week when I looked back at last year's and picked Arizona State under 4.5 and Oklahoma State over 8.5. Clearly, neither of those cashed. But when I look, I do think that the conversation does start with Arizona State. Obviously, Cam Skattebo off to the NFL, but so much of the rest of this team is back. Sam Levitt at quarterback. They brought in multiple players at running back who I think will be big-time players for them and at least in aggregate might be able to replace what Skattebo brought them. Defensively, this unit was ahead of schedule in so many ways. It wasn't necessarily supposed to be a great unit last year, but they bring back a number of their best players, including C.J. Fite and Xavier Alford. So I do think that they have a very good chance to be picked preseason number 1 in the Big 12, and I think it's deserved. I think that BYU is very undervalued nationally. I mean, they finished 11-2 last year, and I don't feel like hardly anybody talked about it, and they return a whole lot of the core of that team that made it happen. So I think they're in the top group. two teams from the state of Texas that I think will be fascinating as well are Baylor, who ended the year on a 6-game winning streak, and Texas Tech, which brought in the number 3 transfer class in the nation, clearly the best in the Big 12. I think that they're poised for big jumps. And then you have to throw Kansas State as well into that conversation. A little bit of a transition year last year with a first-year quarterback in Avery Johnson, but I expect them to be back to business in 2025. So, again, it's 5 teams, and I think that there's many others that could get into the conversation, teams like Kansas, teams like Utah, teams like TCU, but that would be my top group right now.
Where Colorado was interesting last year because, you either were a believer or you were not with Deion Sanders. And, of course, that decision was going to be made based on your belief in guys like Shedeur Sanders and Travis Hunter, who are no longer part of this program. They're both going to be drafted in the first round in a couple of weeks. What's it going to take for Colorado to at least stay where they were at this past season? And is upward mobility possible when you lose 2 players like that?
Well, it's so fascinating because when you look at Colorado and when you look at really Deion Sanders' entire coaching career at the collegiate level, like most of what he's done has been about featuring Shedeur Sanders and Travis Hunter. And whenever they made that huge leap, it was when Shedeur came in. Obviously, you look at last year, again, when you talk about 2-person partnerships in the entire sport, not just in the Big 12, they were as good as any. And so what's interesting about 2025 for Colorado is that for better or worse, they're just going to have to be a normal football team. They're going to have to be, a team that's complementary, that has depth, that gets better, because they don't have stars necessarily that are just going to bail them out in big moments. Now, I do think that the biggest point of optimism for them is defensively. Robert Livingston comes back at defensive coordinator, and he was a huge addition last year. Travis Hunter and Shedeur are going to get most of the credit, but I think that the difference between 4-8 and 9-4 last year was the defense that Robert Livingston brought in. So he'll be back. A lot of the top players on that defense are back. Offensively, I'm fascinated. They can't be as poor running the ball as they have in the past. You have to hope that even though they're bringing in a 3rd offensive line coach in 3 years, that they're able to take a step there. But I just don't know if this is going to have a chance to be as good an offense as it was last season. I think it'll be a decent unit, but for me, it's just hard to see them replicating what they did last season without those superstars in the lineup. Now, maybe some of them will come along. I look at a Draylon Miller at wide receiver. I look at Julian Lewis at quarterback. But I just don't see those guys on day one that are going to make the transition seamless.
What about the top of the top? What about nationally? Who do you have prognosticated to be the best teams, maybe the top 5 nationally this year?
Yeah, it's a great question. And, this, I think, is going to be a pretty open year because you look at some of the best teams in the country from last year. Ohio State lost a whole lot of talent. Georgia loses Carson Beck. I do think that we might see some movement there. I do think that Ohio State, just because of their depth of talent, still belongs in that conversation. And the team that they played against in the national title game, Notre Dame, is one who I think is being a little undervalued right now. They're going to obviously lose Riley Leonard at quarterback, but I actually think that their passing game could take a pretty big step forward with Steve Angeli or CJ Carr ready to take over. And defensively, this team is freakish on the defensive side of the ball. They've got a lot of guys heading into their 3rd years in the system, and I expect them to maybe even have the number 1 defense nationally. You have to talk about Texas as part of this conversation. A lot of turnover for them, but they have as many star players returning as anybody in college football. Anthony Hill at linebacker, Colin Simmons at defensive end, Arch Manning, of course, taking over at quarterback. For me, it's going to be, can they continue to reload at receiver? I'd argue even last year they didn't necessarily do it, and that held them back in some ways. But I do expect them to continue to move forward, and I think that getting C.J. Baxter back at running back will keep them in that conversation. A team I'm fascinated by and curious if they can get back to title level is Clemson, who might have the best quarterback in the country in Cade Klubnik, and the receiver core that finally looks like some of those title receiver cores. Antonio Williams, kind of leading that group. Bryant Wesco in there as well. And so, again, it's going to be, can they get to that title level, or will they be kind of near the top of the ACC again? And a 15 that I'd throw out there as well, who I think is going to get a lot of offseason hype because of what they bring back, is Penn State. Of course, they make the Final Four last year, and Drew Aller decides to come back. Their running backs, Katron Allen and Nick Singleton, are back. Receiver is going to be their giant existential issue. If they can solve that position, they are title caliber. If they can't, they probably aren't.
The Big Ten and the SEC, they like to have their secret meetings, and they're in control of college football and control of college athletics in a lot of ways, as they took down a national championship last night, did the SEC. The college football playoff, I liked the expanded 12-team format, and I understand why some people didn't love it as much, and some people, like the Big Ten and the SEC, said, hey, well, how can we make this better for us? It seems like we're moving towards a spot where it's either going to expand again according to their desires and their terms, or continually expand according to their desires and their terms. How rapidly do you expect these changes to take place?
Well, I don't think that we'll get it for the 2025 season. I expect the 12-team playoff to be back. But for 2026, I do think that we will see some movement. For people who don't know, the initial college football playoff contract, the one that was signed back in 2014, goes through the 2025 season. And so changing the contract, for example, for this past year and for this year to make it 12 teams, it required a unanimous vote from all of the conferences. Starting in 2026, that will no longer be the case. So they have an agreement in place to have a playoff that will have at least 12 teams. I would think that 14 or 16 are possible, certainly, but that is going to change in 2026, and it won't require as unanimous a decision as changing the one for 2025. So, the big sort of existential question about all this, and some of it depends on whether we're doing 12 or 14 or 16, is the idea of auto bids, right? The SEC and the Big Ten are trying to push for 4 for each of those leagues. The Big 12 and ACC would get 2 each in that scenario. But there has been a lot of pushback. I mean, when it was proposed back a year ago or whatever it was, like, the pushback actually caused these leagues to kind of scale back. And the big criticism of them was fundamentally, well, isn't this anti-competitive? The idea of essentially having a guaranteed 4th spot no matter the quality of what the team is. And so I do think that there's going to be pushback. I do think there are going to be concessions. I do think that if I had to guess, I don't know if we're going to have as many as 4 guaranteed spots for those leagues. I think maybe at the end of the day, they'll be used as a negotiating ploy. And the other thing that I'll say on top of that is, I mean, the SEC shouldn't need guaranteed spots to get 4 in. The Big Ten shouldn't need, guaranteed spots to get 4 in. And so I do think, and frankly, in some ways, hope at the end of the day that we don't move towards a system that has so many guaranteed spots. But certainly, look, I mean, there's this idea that they know they want to consolidate. They already have reached an agreement that pays their teams more money than the other leagues. And again, it's really a question of how far do they want to go.
Last thing before I let you go, sounds like there's maybe a small delay in the House settlement. I think the judge said, here's an extra week to try to iron out some of these details. Is this going to turn into anything bigger, or is this an eventuality? The House settlement is going to go through. We'll get the $20.5 million salary cap effectively for revenue sharing. Will there be any significant changes in your mind from the latest development?
Yeah, I think that the most interesting thing that seems to have come out in the first day was the idea of kind of having a smoothing process to where players essentially, as you transition to full scholarship rosters that are capped at a certain number, that there might be a little bit more of a transition time that would actually, I think, be potentially in terms of planning purposes, like that could be a huge change. Like I was hearing of one program that finished spring ball already, and they've already started making cuts and telling kids that they aren't welcome back. So I think that would be potentially a big deal in terms of how this would be handled. And certainly I wouldn't want to be that program having to go back to kids and saying to come back. But that's the one biggest thing. I do think at the end of the day, it will be approved, I think, mostly in this form. And I would be surprised. I do expect that by July 1st, we are in a revenue-sharing world.
Shahan, always appreciate your time. Thanks so much for joining us on the show today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Shahan Jayaraja does a lot of college football, but does a little bit of everything. CBS Sports insider. Kind enough to give us his time on the show today. That last question I just asked him was about the judge in the House settlement case, which would be the motion that moves forward revenue sharing in college sports, has extended things just a little bit, wanting the attorneys on both sides to figure some things out. And it's a week delay at this point. But we'll tell you what points are being disputed. We'll tell you what Utah athlete actually spoke in court. Sean O'Connell Show, ESPN 700, 92.1 FM, proud part of Utah's ESPN radio network. The Festival of Teas from ESPN 700 and 92.1 FM is powered by the Utah Golf Association. Every day, We're giving away free rounds of golf at the best courses in the state of Utah. Listen to Down and Dirty with Scott Mitchell. That's 10 to 11. The Sean O'Connell Show you're already listening to, 11 to 2. And The Drive with Spence Checketts, 2 to 6, for a chance to win rounds of golf at some of Utah's best locations, courtesy of the Utah Golf Association and our Festival of Tees. I like that. I like the play on words. I'm a good fan. I'm a big fan of the play on words type stuff, James.
Yeah, it's a celebration of real spring beginning in Utah. And
are we ready to declare that now?
I mean,
real spring?
It's getting there, right? It's
I
got to
hope
be.
so.
It's got to be getting there. Today we got 9 holes to Nibley Park to give away.
Ooh.
By the way,
All right.
I know there's lots of Nibley fans out there, so this is your chance.
Little
win
snack,
tonight.
little snack to give away, little
Yeah.
golf snack.
A little golf snack. We also have Breaking Benjamin tickets coming September. Utah First Credit Union Amphitheater.
All right.
Breaking Benjamin, your jam.
I'm okay with breaking Benjamin.
Yeah.
I've been known to go to a store and ask them to break a Benjamin. Oh, man, look what you're doing. You're rubbing off on me.
You are. You do love the puns, the play on words.
Terrible. All right, let's talk about this. So we are very near finalization of the House multi-billion-dollar settlement situation with NCAA athletics. $2.8 billion in damages to past and current athletes to settle 3 federal antitrust lawsuits. It's colloquially referred to as the House versus NCAA settlement case.
Natural disaster cleanup level of damages.
That's a big deal. That is Twister 2.
There's a lot of damages.
All right, $2.8 billion in damages to be handed out to members of the class action. And I feel like I know something about these things now because I am a member of a class action suit that is nearing a payout, actually.
Okay, so the resolution for the UFC one has come down. You're waiting on the payout now?
$375 million is what the UFC settled on. There are 1,200-ish members of the class. And by the way, this is $2.8 billion, which is significantly more, obviously.
Yeah, but also bigger class, right?
There are like 39,000 people in this class. So it's not going to be like generational wealth for anybody.
No.
But what it is going to do, there's the difference between the two settlements is the first one, the UFC one, there was no clause for injunctive relief. So there's no legal reason for the UFC to change their practices. They just settle, pay out the damages, like, okay, and we can go back to doing things the way we've done them.
Okay.
There is another case pending against the UFC that is seeking injunctive relief, and that could change things. But we're here to talk about the NCAA case. Part of this settlement case is the injunctive relief that revenue sharing has to be a thing moving forward.
Wow.
So the NCAA and its member institutions are no longer allowed to do it the way it's been done. That's why the damages were being awarded, and in order to prevent another one of these cases coming in 20 years or 10 years or 1 year for that matter, they're saying, nope, you're going to pay people out every year now. And it's going to be a $20.5 million cap. The other interesting thing about this, there is an attempt in the NCAA world and in the college athletics world to somehow find a way to police NIL funding so that you can't just circumvent the cap, right? The salary cap imposed by this settlement, the $20.5 million. Because like
some kind of NIL pseudo cap.
Because here's the thing: if everyone, right, Utah State's got to pay $20.5 million to their athletes
if they opt in, because isn't there an opt-in, opt-out, whatever?
And if you don't opt in, by the way, no one's coming to play.
You're going to get left behind. Yeah,
so you have to opt in.
You have to opt in.
Utah's made it clear. Mark Harlan came on the show and on Spence's show said, yes, we plan to be full participants here. You have to if you want to compete.
Yeah.
All right.
Especially if you're in a Power 4 conference already, like if you want to be in the big even group of 5, but to a bigger extent, Power 4, if you're in that conference, you've already said we think we belong with the big boys, so
you've
you
already
have
signed
to
up.
put your money
like-
where your mouth is. Yeah.
There are some schools that are like the rookie at the team dinner, right? Everyone else is on their $100 million contracts, and you're sitting there making the league minimum, and they're buying bottles of champagne and drinking $100 cocktails.
And it's your turn to buy, rookie.
And everyone's buying a tomahawk steak, and you're just like, you're watching that. Like if you're LeBron James, you're just like, yeah, put it on my card.
Yeah.
If you're the guy on the league minimum, you're just like, oh, geez. There are a lot of programs that are in that world. They're just like, what, 20 what? $20 million?
Did you say million?
Like, look, Utah Athletics, their own numbers say they operated at a deficit transitioning into the Big 12.
Yeah.
And you think it's easy for them to now be like, yeah, we'll come up with $21 million every year after this. And by the way, that number is going to continue to go up. Anyway, there are efforts in this case to say, hey, but everyone's only going to spend $21 million. Nope, can't put that genie back in the bottle. Sorry.
Yeah.
So there's been a delay because the judge, there's still some details to iron out. And the Judge Wilkin is her name, has said, look, you need to figure these things out before I sign this settlement. Judges are also allowed to offer suggestions on what both sides, the attorneys on both sides, can do to come to resolution. They're not able to like impose anything, but then they get to sign off and say, yes, that was good enough conflict resolution. I will sign off on this. So as this gets closer and closer to resolution, one of the big sticking points is roster limits. And whether or not, and you heard Shahan Jayaraja refer to this, whether or not the roster limits thing is going to be hard and fast. Instead of a scholarship limit, now the proposed change is you're just going to have everyone's going to get a scholarship, but you're only going to have, instead of 85 scholarships, 120 total players, you're going to have 90 scholarship players, and that's it.
That's all.
Walk-ons, see you later. And that means cuts in every sport. Actually, a Utah swimmer, a lot of athletes are participating in this by proxy. Gannon Flynn is a freshman swimmer at the University of Utah, went to the hearing and said, look, if you impose these roster limits, I don't get to stay at the University of Utah. My coaches have already told me that when the roster limits come into effect, I don't have a roster spot. So what you're going to do is you're going to send 1,000+ athletes, it's actually many thousands of athletes, out into the streets looking for transfer opportunities, looking for some place to land. We already know what that looks like because of the football transfer portal and the basketball transfer portal. Now you're going to do it in every sport.
The odds are already not in the transfer's favor.
Correct.
This would be much worse.
And by the way, like these are transfers who are being actively told you're not good enough to play here.
Rough.
A lot of coaches are going to be like, well, Utah said you weren't good enough, so I don't have any interest in having you come swim for Cal. Bad example because Cal's got a better swim program. But whatever.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, why? Like
Sasquatch State doesn't want you to swim for them.
I'm UC Santa Barbara. Why do I want you if Utah didn't want you? I already have a roster with new limits. I don't have room. So this is one of the arguments. And the judge's idea was, why don't we grandfather in a transition period where the roster limits are imposed gradually and that, you know, you don't have to cut. If your football program right now has 120 players on it, you don't have to cut down to 85 tomorrow. Apparently, Shahan Jayaraja spoke with one team who already finished spring ball, who already is doing that.
Wow.
It might be BYU. They're done with spring football. They know that the roster limits are coming, and they had 100 and something guys on that roster.
And Shahan covers college football nationally, but he lives in the Big 12 footprint, so that's a bit of a focus for him. So yeah, it could end up being a school like BYU.
And even if it's not, right, then BYU and Utah are going to have to do this. If the settlement, as it's written up now, there's no grandfather clause, and it's just like, hey, roster limits in every sport. In football, we decided that's going to be 90, 92, 85, whatever you decide. That's going to be the new roster limit. There are now 25 guys from every football team. Most of them are walk-ons. Most of them are people that were going to be cut or encouraged to leave anyway. But they're all in the transfer portal immediately, same day, same time.
This roster limits, the start of these roster limits might be that nightmare moment that a lot of these athletes never forget,
Dude,
that we've been talking about.
So if we do the math on there's 119 Division I football teams, and 20 guys from every single team minimum have to go. All of a sudden, the transfer portal has 2,100 players and probably more like 3,000 players in it to go with the guys that have already been floating in the transfer portal. Suddenly, that's just in football. That's not swimming, basketball, softball, etc. Suddenly, you have an absolute nightmare scenario where Division I athletes are just like, I had a scholarship, I had a future planned out, and now my former peers are getting money because of this settlement, and I don't even have a place to go to school anymore.
Yeah.
You better hope Weber State picks up the phone. You better hope Southern Utah's like, hell yeah, dude, we were hoping we could get some people to replace the transfers who left to go to BYU. That's nuts. Anyway, it's happening, and shout out Gannon Flynn being an activist for himself and other athletes that are on this cut bubble. $2.8 billion in damages, divided up in a way that is, by the way, being disputed by female athletes everywhere, because 90% of the damages payments are going to go to men's athletics.
Yeah,
because that's where the bulk of the revenue that is disputed in this settlement comes from. So this is going to be ugly no matter what.
This is messy no matter what. It's already messy. It's probably going to get messier. Or, NHL playoffs about to start. Messier. as time goes on.
Why don't you just say Leo Messi?
Or Lionel Messi. Yeah. Do you want to hear my nightmare scenario that I always think of?
Yes.
In like a minute or so.
Let's do it in 3 minutes.
Okay.
I will ask a trivia question. You will tell me your horrible memory, and if Spence is around,
Spence can give us his.
He'll give us his. Sean
I
O'Connell
love it.
Show wrapping up next on ESPN 700 92.1 FM. 877-353-0700 on our text line. That's how you answer your question for topical trivia today. We have Breaking Benjamin tickets, and we have, from our Festival of Teas, we have Nibley Park Golf. 9 holes at Nibley. Is that right, James?
That's correct.
Okay.
A little Nibley of golf, if you will.
We got to stop, dude. We've been bad with this all day. All right. Last night, Houston Cougars fell 63-65 to the Florida Gators in the national championship game. They led by double digits in a lot of portions of this game. Collapsed down the stretch, similar to how Duke did. The leading scorer for Houston was L.J. Cryer. How many points did L.J. Cryer score in the national championship game? 877-353-0700 for your Breaking Benjamin tickets and 9 holes at Nibley. All right, we spent a lot of time on the show today talking about the nightmare scenario for Emmanuel Sharp and how he's not ever going to forget that. He's never going to live that down. He's never going to be able – he's going to be 60 years old and have nightmares about that moment. I promise you. And I told my high school football story of a play that should have been made and wasn't made, and I screwed up. And you just have those moments in sports. It's unfortunate. It's probably unavoidable. And James Peterson, you had one of those moments. Tell me what yours was. And then we're going to get Spence Checketts' moment from his sports career, his vaunted sports career, that he just can't get out of his head.
So, sadly, mine is not even at the varsity level,
Okay.
but it is high. It was technically high school basketball.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
So in the summertime, growing up, we didn't have the AAU scene hadn't reached Southern Utah quite yet the way it has now in the rest of the state. So, other than in season, the only other opportunity to play competitive basketball was at the summer team camps that we had. And I, up to that point, this is my sophomore year, or going into my sophomore year. Up to that point, not like a bench player on the freshman team, didn't make the teams before that. So pretty new player. Always in pickup basketball, pretty good at shooting threes, but never really able to do that in games yet. That summer, I'm starting to go off in these games. I'm averaging like 15 to 20 points a game.
Okay, shout out James.
Hitting
James.
4 to 5 threes a game in this summer camp tournament. Then the last game in this like championship game format, for the first time, but it's all a surprise, so no one's guarding me, right? This last game, they've got the scout on me, so they put their best defender on me. I'm bottled up.
Okay.
But the only real chance I have at a shot is at the buzzer.
Okay. But
I was talking about earlier in the show when the difference between college and pros is guys, 3-point shooters, is guys don't know when it's an open shot.
That's right.
Right? They think, okay, that's not enough room for me to shoot. In the NBA, they know that if you've got a few inches of space, that's enough room to shoot. So that's the situation I was in. I passed up what would have been a game-winning shot. We end up missing it. I think about that quite a bit. I'm like, hey, there was actually enough room for me to take that shot, and I was on fire all camp. Didn't end up doing much that sophomore season. Didn't make the teams after that. It's one of those things. I wonder if I had confidence to shoot that game winner.
You'd have made the game winner, James.
How things might have turned out afterwards. Because it was the best basketball in a team in like organized basketball I'd ever played, and I never got to that point again.
Look, it doesn't matter the level. Every athlete has that thing. I don't care if it was T-ball. You're probably like, one time I dropped a fly ball and it hit me in the eye and I got a black eye. Whatever it is. Spence Checketts, I'm sure, has one of these because every former athlete, current athletes have them. His show, The Drive, by the way, is coming up next. Spence Checketts is the host of that show. He does an incredible job.
Wow. Long time no see, Sean.
How are you?
I'm well. How are you?
I'm fine.
How was Orlando?
Yeah, Orlando was awesome.
Little sunshine.
A little sunshine.
And then you came back in time for sunshine here.
Yeah. I missed, I think, some snow flurries again while I was in Orlando. It was great to be back
Good, man.
Doing some shows here. Got Paris RV super sale tomorrow at Layton Hills Mall. Come
Very
on,
nice.
hang out if you're up there in Weber and Davis counties. I'd love to see you.
Nice job with AJ yesterday, by the way.
Thank you. It was
Good conversation.
very gracious in giving us time while he's got 2 important jobs to handle.
Mm-hmm.
But let's get to the most important thing on my show today, the Spence Checketts moment that lives in his mind of like, oh, I can't believe that happened.
Well, we can't gloss over James just averaging 20 a night during this summer league tournament. You know, our guys getting buckets. We can't just gloss over that. I have 2.
He was a young Nikola Jokic.
I have 2. I have more than 2, but I have 2 because to your point, Emmanuel Sharp is going to be in his 70s going, I blew it for the national championship, right? So the first one, high school basketball, New Canaan High, stand up proud, Wilton's in town. And if you are playing in the FCAC and you're playing for New Canaan, you got to beat the other whites. Right?
You got to beat Wilton.
You got to beat Wilton because Wilton has future hedge fund managers. Because if you go to Norwalk or Stanford or Bridgeport, you run into the brothers and you're down 40 at halftime. So in order to even be competitive, if you're going to the white school, you got to beat the other whites. You got to beat Darien, you got to beat Greenwich, you got to beat Fairfield, you got to beat Westport, and you got to beat Wilton.
You better beat Wilton.
You got to beat Wilton, all right? And we were down 11 or 12 going into the fourth, and it was the best individual quarter that I ever had. Okay, 17 points, fourth quarter, your guy, 5 threes, 2 free throws.
Hello.
Come back, we tie the game. Wilton turns it over.
5 threes in one
5 threes in one quarter. Still, I believe, the New Canaan High single quarter record, although most of the 3-point records were shattered because the games played differently. At one point, I held the record for threes made in a game with 9, and that was broken incredibly a few years back. And now I think the record, they actually won state a couple years ago. Anyway, tie game, 8 seconds left. And we had run just a bunch of high ball screens because we were down and we were just trying to get looks and shoot threes. So my defender anticipated that I was going to dribble up and get a high ball screen and then try to shoot a 3 to win the game. But instead, I did a baseline spin move, and I had a wide-open 5-foot bunny that would have tied the game and sent it to overtime. And I released it, and I'm like, oh, that's good. Around the rim, toilet bowl, falls out, buzzer sounds, and we lost.
No.
And it was a bunny. It was an easy shot. If I would have used the glass, I would have laid it in. We would have. But again, that was it was only for us to beat the other whites, and we needed to beat the whites. So there wasn't anything at stake.
Yeah.
So that's number 1. Number 2, believe it or not, freshman year football, I was a wide receiver, and I was a little slot wide receiver because the whites, and I had not scored a touchdown all year.
Sneaky athletic. Coach on the field.
Gritty, plucky.
Yeah.
Underrated athlete, they would say.
Yeah.
I hadn't caught a touchdown all year. They called a play for me, about a 5-yard line. It was just a little out. Burned my man wide open. My quarterback, shout out Don Gurney, Notre Dame proud. Put a very easy pass, and I'm in front of the cheerleaders on the sideline, one of whom at the time I was enjoying a little time with here or there. And I dropped it in the most embarrassing way. I mean, it was a little out. The guy, he went in, and I was wide open, and my buddy just tossed it. It was backyard pitch and catch, and it just fell right through my hands. And you could hear everybody just go, oh. So, yes, those are the 2. And I was 14 when I dropped that touchdown pass. I was 16 when I missed
later,
the game.
You're still just
I am still, to this day, at times I'm like, I can't believe I missed that game winner against Wilton.
I told my story. Jordan versus Alta. Had it easy.
Shout out Pete Diggers.
Had it easy pick 6, and I couldn't decide whether I was going to light up the receiver or if I was going to go for the ball, so I did neither.
Yeah.
And I'll never get over it, ever.
Yeah, and to your point, it can be junior jazz. It can be ward ball. It can be backyard football with your family. There are all these moments where, like, glory was in your hands and you blew it, and it just you get over it, but it never fully leaves your psyche.
And none of us did it on national television in the highest stakes environment possible, where literally thousands of people are talking about your mistake today.
Yeah,
Emmanuel
and mistakes,
Sharp.
plural. You had 2 turnovers. And if you're Kelvin Sampson, like, they didn't get a shot in their final 4. They had 4 straight turnovers to close the game.
Gross.
I mean, a 12-point lead, trying to come back down 12 against Houston. We watched Houston, Sean, steal the souls of teams this year in the Big 12 with their defense. A 12-point comeback against that team was like a 30-point comeback against a normal SEC team that Florida plays like a Tennessee that wants to get up and down. Houston takes the eye out of the basketball. They suffocate you defensively. When they went up 12, I almost was like, well, this sucks. It's a blowout. I was hoping for a good game. I'm still stunned that Florida came back and got that done.
Hey, look, Florida's lucky that was the last game of the season because whatever Duke flew, that they just passed it on to Houston. And Florida's next game, watch, it'll be next year. Florida is going to fall apart in the second half and just look terrible. And it's because it's like a demon that passes from host to host.
The Duke loss, to your point, we didn't get a chance to talk about it. Like, I don't think enough people talked about what an epic collapse that was. And the Zion James kid's a good player. I put that on John Shire, their coach. After the 5th failed inbounds pass, let Con Knipple throw it in. Like, take the kid off the baseline. It was almost like brutally mean. So the NBA is weird. I guess it doesn't matter if you're a good coach or a good player. You can get fired or you can get traded. You see Michael Malone got fired?
Yeah.
The Denver coach after a decade?
Yeah. And they're a 4 seed, could be a 3 seed, heading into the playoffs in a week.
They won a championship 2 years ago in a city that hasn't won a title in like 50 years.
Yes.
Taylor Jenkins loses a job. Luka Doncic gets traded. This league is weird, man.
It's a very, very strange. You know what's going to be hilarious is when Memphis is just like, never mind, we want Malone to be our coach. We fired our guy 2 weeks
to bring
ago.
in Mike Malone, yeah.
Dude, what a weird situation.
It is, man.
I don't get it.
Yeah, no, I'm with you.
I do wish that I was an owner with that level of not give a you-know-what, where I'm just like, you know what I'm going to do? I've got one of the best players in the world. I'm going to blindside him a week before the playoffs start by taking away the GM, taking away the coach, and just sending them all adrift in uncertainty. Because I got 3 other teams making me billions of dollars.
Seriously,
doesn't matter.
yeah. And look, if I'm a Nuggets fan, I'm more upset at the Cronkies than I'm about anything else. They refuse to pay luxury tax. They have a once-in-a-generational player, maybe the best player of this generation. And Russell Westbrook is your answer. Like, they didn't surround him with talent. They won't pay luxury tax, and they just fired a really good coach. So yeah, it's. I was just thinking about this driving in, man. The NBA is bizarre this year with everything that's gone on.
Spence Checketts will be talking about that and so much more
Good to see
on
you,
the
brother.
drive today. Good to see you. Thanks to all of you for listening and to everyone who joined us on the show today. We'll be at the Layton Hills Mall in the parking lot for the Paris RV Super Sale tomorrow. Stop by, say hello. We'll have some stuff to give away, and you can check out the great RVs. It's the Sean O'Connell Show, ESPN 700, 92 on FM.